Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this morning. We're going to go through a few topics here. We're going to be looking at the recent massacre that happened in New Zealand in Christchurch. We're going to be looking at that. We're going to be looking at the issue of Cardinal Pell, who's the third highest official in the Vatican. He's been sentenced to 6 years jail here in Australia for child molestation. We're going to be also looking at, I'm going to be focusing on writing a book this year, actually 3 books. And so I'm going to be talking about that. We're going to look at a little bit about books concerning the King James translators and King James himself. I also want to talk about a dartboard diagram that I did up on Facebook and some of the comments there. And then we're going to be going through part of a dividing line program by James White, where he has recently called me a cultist and said that he had blocked me from Twitter. So we're going to go through that, and then finally we're going to look at a James Snap article. So we're going to be going through James Snap, and so we're going to be looking at what he says in the text of the Gospels. And so first off, I just want to talk about the massacre that's happened in New Zealand. Now, as a Christian, it's really strange because you get so many fake Christians. You know, it's a bit like being a vegetarian. If you're a vegetarian and you run into your friends and they all say, yeah, I'm a vegetarian too, or whatever. But then they're eating a meat pie, they're having a steak, and you just know they're not vegetarian, they're not dedicated, they're not really into it, you know. You don't get meat-eating vegetarians. Now, when I say to people, you don't get Christians who kill people or rape people, they usually say, oh, that's a true Scotsman fallacy. It's actually not, because if you eat meat, you're not a vegetarian. If you go diametrically against the teachings of Jesus, you're not a Christian. It's pretty basic. I mean, if I'm, 400 pounds overweight, I'm sitting on the couch eating chips and I say, look, I'm a disciple of Bruce Lee, and someone comes along and says, well, throw a punch. It's like, I can't punch. Throw a kick. It's like, I don't know how to do that. It's are you really a disciple of Bruce Lee? And so this is the thing. People assume because someone says they're a Christian, they are. And this is one of the first things Jesus says in Matthew 24. He says, beware that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name. This is Jesus talking. Many will come in my name, saying that I am Christ, or in Mark it says, I am the Christ, and shall deceive many. And so that means many people are going to call Jesus the Christ. The Jehovah's Witnesses say he's the Messiah, he's the anointed one, he's the Christ. The Mormons say that. The Catholics say that. Many people who would say they're born-again Christians and, Hillsong, if you went there, they'd all say, yeah, Jesus is the Christ. They call him the Christ and so on. So Jesus is saying, many will come in my name, saying I am Christ, correctly saying I'm the Messiah, and they're going to be great deceivers. So just because they say they're a Christian, just because they name themselves after Christ. Christian means Christ-like, okay? So when someone labels themselves a Christian, they're saying, I believe Jesus is my Messiah. I believe he is the Messiah. And so Jehovah's Witnesses say that. They point to Jesus and say he's the Messiah, but they're deceivers, So we can understand that that's coming to pass before our eyes. Now, you do get certain hate groups. Usually these hate groups are in the United States. United States has a huge history with the Ku Klux Klan. And so what we're seeing here in Australia is there is a bit of a rise of white nationalism. A lot of people don't want to say that because what usually happens is you get thrown into 2 different camps. You get thrown to the left or to the right. And so if you say, certain things that are sort of in the middle, you can get thrown in each direction, especially if you're a libertarian and you don't adhere to any type of left or right. And usually the right and the left, when you take them both to their extremes, usually it's Nazism or Russian-style communism, which are both different warring factions of socialism. So it's interesting to notice that when you look at World War II, Russians against the Germans, it's two competing types of socialism, where basically in Russia it was totalitarian. The government owned everything, and there's nothing you can do about it. You don't have any real rights or property rights or anything like that. Where in Germany, it was very similar, but what they did is they allowed certain people to have property rights and own businesses and things like that. And so it's a different form of socialism. See, when the Nazis first started to come to power, or first started to advertise for people to join their group, they actually advertised as a Leninist ideologies, having Leninist ideas. So basically, it's socialism, and they're called National Socialists. It's pretty, well documented. But usually nowadays, capitalism sort of gets thrown in, and if you're a capitalist, you're a Nazi, and pretty much it's gotten to the stage now where you don't have to be racist at all. You just have to be born in a certain country, born to certain parents, have a certain type of education when you're growing up, and all of a sudden you reach adulthood and you're like, oh, I didn't know I was a racist. It's just because everyone calls you that. And but this is part of the media. And look, if you don't listen to mainstream media, it's pretty hard nowadays. I haven't listened to media for quite a long time, especially sensationalized type media. I do like to look into political things and the rest of it. But what we see is, now on our Facebook, it's just constant bombardment of you're either in this camp or you're in that camp, and most people can't think out of the two-party paradigm. They can't think, there's a middle ground or none of them are right, sort of thing. And so they just try to pigeonhole you and put you in a different camp. So what's happening in Christchurch is at the moment, I think they're saying up to 60 people have been killed. Most of my feed is saying 49, but I did hear there was about 60 apparently. Now, there is a huge confusion over white people being labelled as Christian. So, having lived in Pakistan for a year, I understand how locals think, and looking at like news programs and things like that, and getting people to explain to me what's being said and things, and even a lot of the media surrounding what's happening in Australia with the politician getting the egg slammed in the back of his head. That's basically said that was a young Muslim guy attacking a high-ranking Australian politician. So it's sort of the news is skewed like that, and so people usually see white people, like from many of the Asian countries, they see white people as Christians, and we are seen as a Christian country. Now, I constantly try to correct that. I say, look, there's probably only about less than 1% of genuine Bible-believing, read your Bible every day and pray and, have a relationship with God and all that. There's probably only about less than 1%. I mean, even if you just counted the churches, get rid of the cults and things like that, just count the churches, there's not many Christians in Australia. And so, a lot of people say they're Christian, but, they're down at the nightclub. Lots of people just say that. They went to a Youth Alive concert and put their hand up at the end, and they're saved, and they've got a heroin problem, and they're a cross-dresser, but it's like, you're a Christian. They're being told they're a Christian, so they take that on board. So unfortunately what we see is there is a lot of hate preachers. So we have guys like, say, Stephen Anderson now. A couple of years back, it might have even been last year, there was about 50 homosexual guys killed in a nightclub in the United States. Now, this sort of thing is, it's pretty common in America, to see, a massacre. I mean, look at what happened in Las Vegas, and, the massacres seem to happen, and shootings seem to happen quite regularly, and that we don't really even hear about it a lot of the time, just, another 6 people have died, or another church has been, shot up or whatever. And unless you're really following the news, it's quite frequent how often there is shootings and there is massacres and things like that. Then there's the whole gun debate that gets thrown in there. Now, in Australia, we understand that when the Port Arthur massacre happened, basically the gun laws, the gun freedom sort of got thrown under the bus. People were convinced of handing their guns, and to this day, people are like, it's the best decision John Howard's ever made to do this sort of stuff, and so and I understand all those arguments, but at the end of the day, sometimes you see crimes happening. See, one thing they're not mentioning is in the second mosque, someone did have a gun, and they were able to stop that. And so this is one of the things where the thwarted massacres rarely get any headlines. And so you'll see someone run into a cinema about to blow the place up or shoot everyone up, and someone has a gun. So some law-abiding citizen who, they carry a gun around them, they shoot this guy dead, but only one person got shot or something like that. So it doesn't get much media attention. And of course, we can see that there is a push to disarm people. And I understand that, I understand where people are at on both sides and all that. And Australia used to be a place where there was lots of guns, probably back in the 80s. But actually, there are still lots of guns in Australia, just to give you a heads up, but they're all illegal. So you get hate preachers like Stephen Anderson when the homosexuals were shot in the nightclub. He came out and he was just like, who cares? They're just pedophiles anyway, and all this sort of stuff. And from a Christian perspective, from a biblical perspective, Jesus was a total pacifist. He didn't fight back. People say, he made a whip and whipped people out. It doesn't say he actually whipped people. I believe that he was whipping these animals out, and the people were just driven out with that, It's not like he just walked up to some woman and just, whipped her on the face and she's just there crying with blood all over her or something. It's just ridiculous. People read into the Bible, that sort of stuff. When Jesus said, here, take a sword with you, and they said, okay, we got this sword. And he said, that's enough. I mean, people just think a sword, it's warfare. No, in those days, you would carry a sword because they're in the Middle East. There's snakes, there's animals, there's all sorts of things. It might have even been more like a machete, you're cutting through things, then Peter goes to use it and gets fully rebuked. He goes to cut off, Marcus's ear and gets fully rebuked for it. And so people use these things out of context to justify certain things. As a Christian, we are called to be like those people in the Fox's Book of Martyrs. If you really want to challenge your Christianity, go and get the Fox's Book of Martyrs and read it. Now, if you go to the bookshop, local Coorong or something like that, you will get 4% of the original. If you want to see the one with all the pictures of people getting burnt at the stake and people not fighting the government and not fighting the Catholics and not fighting people who persecuted them, go online and look up Fox's Book of Martyrs. Now, I really want to print this book. I'd love to print this book and make it popular again because this was the most popular book in England for 100 years beside the besides the Bible. And so you had all the way through from Henry VIII, roughly from around that time, John Fox, he started to bring out articles and bring out snippets of that, and then eventually Fox's Book of Martyrs was produced, and that the only thing that rivaled that was the Bible itself. And so, but we see these hate preachers. There's another guy online called Alan Puckett. I think his name is Puckett or something like that. And so you see him, at the gay pride rallies and out the front of an abortion clinic or out the front of a mosque. And these guys aren't saying, look, God loves you, God cares for you, Jesus died on the cross for you, you can be saved. And what they're saying is, you guys, you're going to go to hell, and you're going to, they're just. I understand there is two sides of the coin. You tell people about the judgment of God, the wrath of God that's coming, and all the rest of it. But these guys seem to relish in that, and this guy actually claimed that the Crusades were the greatest evangelistic tool ever used. I was just like, the Crusades? And so these guys are what I call Herodians. Herod, he wanted to, he would kill a whole bunch of babies to get his, to get what he wants. He would kill his wife. He would kill his family. He's a Herodian. And so it's sort of like the ends justifies the means. These guys mix the Old and New Testament, and they believe that they can go and bash people. They look for people who attack them online. They'll go and look for them and bash them and push them over and punch them in the head, and they think that's justified, and they think that's how Jesus was. They're like, Jesus isn't a pussy. Jesus, he whipped people, and Jesus did this, and he rebuked people, and that's what we're doing. And it's like, no, dude, you are a thug. Coming from that sort of lifestyle where, I grew up like that, grew up fighting street fights, and grew up in Melbourne, and it was a rough place to grow up in, and hanging around drug dealers, hanging around people who are always fighting, and in pubs and pub brawls and things like that. And it's like, to me, to see these guys say they're Christians and doing pretty much the same thing, but holding up a sign saying, pretty much the Westboro Baptist sort of stuff, it just makes me sick. And seeing Stephen Anderson, this church boy, saying all that sort of stuff as well, wouldn't be surprised if, something happens to him. And I wouldn't wish anything bad happen to these people. God loves them too. And that's the thing. One of the interesting things about this case in Christchurch is this man is a local. He comes from Grafton. Now, Grafton, for us, is about 2 hours drive south. Now, you've got to understand, we're in rural New South Wales. If you go from Lismore, you drive through a town called Casino, and you drive south from there, and you got Grafton. And so I was there just recently, a few weeks ago at the Trinitarian Bible Society. But in 2006, I invited the Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan to come and preach for us. Now, he became a Christian, fortunately. Now, his name's Johnny Lee Clary. Now, he's passed away now. Now, at the time, I didn't realise really who Johnny Lee Clary was. I just knew that he had this testimony that he used to be the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, and a black preacher converted him, and then he was going around preaching that the Ku Klux Klan is stupid. And so, amazing testimony. And so we were watching some of his videos in church, and I thought I'd look him up on the internet, and he was preaching in Australia. So I gave him a phone call. I said, hey, Johnny, would you be interested in coming up this way if I could organise it? And he said, yeah, I've heard there's a KKK chapter in Casino. And he was like, man, I want to go up there. I really want to confront these people and all the rest of it. So I started organising this, and it got quite big, got a lot of media attention. There was letters put in people's mailboxes saying that if they saw any black children around the neighbourhood, they were going to kill them or bash them or something like that. Which, that sort of threat, you can get a 10-year jail sentence for that sort of thing. And it was signed, Ku Klux Klan. But it's interesting they signed it the KLU, K-L-U, Klux Klan. But, we were sort of like, is it really the Klan, or is it just a bunch of people making it up, or are the Klan, these members that dumb they can't spell, or whatever. And so I started looking into these groups, and, in Melbourne they used to have the National Front, and they approached us when we were young, and, the whole movie Romper Stomper, I don't know if you ever looked into the movie Romper Stomper. Lots of people watched that and basically shaved their head and went out, and they were Nazis. And so running around just bashing people and just meatheads, real, cheap thugs, and just basically that appeals to people who have no culture. It's like, here, become nationalists. Okay, and you just go with it, and real meathead stuff, and just hurting, Asians and yelling out gooks and all that. That was very common. It's probably still common in Melbourne. Yeah, it's one of the most multicultural societies in Australia, or multiracial societies in Australia. And all that sort of stuff happens. So anyway, Johnny Lee Clary came up. He preached for us, and we got quite a big crowd. I think it was like 200 or 300 people at each meeting. So we did one in Lismore. and we did one in Casino. Now, leading up to it, I had a ton of phone calls, people saying that they had been chased by the Ku Klux Klan. They had been bashed by the Ku Klux Klan. They had visits, they had their house burnt down, all sorts of things. So I'm like, man, yeah, so phone call after phone call, I'm getting people telling me about these KKK chapter, and so from what I can gather, now this is just from retrospect, looking back. Basically, what happened is probably between 1985 to sort of like year 2000. There are places in Australia where there are Aboriginal communities, and sometimes Aboriginal communities can get pretty rowdy. And if you state that in Australia, you're sort of considered a racist and all the rest of it. But all my Aboriginal friends would sit with me and say, yes, they know that firsthand. They've lived out at Walgett, they've lived out at Dubbo, they've lived out at Orange, they've lived out at Moree, and they've seen it. And I've seen it firsthand. My business partner was Aboriginal. We used to paint Aboriginal housing. It can get pretty rough. When we've ripped up the floorboards and they're burning it and they've got a fire inside. That's rough. So you do get rough elements. I remember I traced it back. It was years ago in Mount Druitt. What happened was there was a whole bunch of people who were relocated from Mount Druitt up to, I think it was into Dubbo or Walgett area, and they eventually ended up in Moree. And you had a whole bunch of people who didn't really have any respect for law or order or anything like that, but they respected their elders, and they were taken away from their elders. And usually you would see something happen, like, a whole bunch of windows get smashed, or, someone would get bashed or whatever, and the local Aboriginals will say, they're not from here, they're from out west, they're from Moree. And so sort of tracing it back, it's like, oh, they're from Dubbo, or they're from Mount Druitt, and this is just this story, and it goes back to the stolen generation and all that sort of stuff of just people who have grown up with lots of problems. And that happens in any society. And it's happened in Irish, English, it's just a fact of life. And so sometimes what happens is people, they've got their nice little life, the average, white Australian, they've got their nice little life. And so, 10 Aboriginal guys walk on their front lawn, kick over their letterbox, kick their dog, and I've had this happen to me. I was painting a house and in Casino, and about 20 Aboriginal people, they went into this house and they trashed it, and all the paint that I was using for the house, they did big flags on the road, and they wrote their names, and all my tools and ladders were everywhere, and I was ropeable. And there's 20 people, what are you going to do? You can't confront them personally. And talking to locals, they're like, that happens pretty much every night around here. And so when those things happen, what happens is people want to scare these type of people. And so they might, dress up in hoods and chase these people. So at the end of all, inviting this former KKK leader to preach against racism in the area, basically listening to both sides, having Aboriginal friends, talking to people who had been abused by Klan people, and also, understanding the Klan type of ideology. I came to the conclusion that there may have been an official sort of chapter in Casino, but I don't think it was ever very powerful. And I think mostly it was a bunch of guys in the pub sitting around having a drink saying, these guys have done this again, they've kicked over my letterbox again, or whatever. Let's go down and bash them. Let's wear hoods, all this sort of stuff, to really try and scare people or to chase certain people out of the area and all that sort of stuff. So I think that was more so what was happening. But then you got this guy who's just on the shooting. He's from Grafton, which is not that far from Casino. If you look on the map in Australia, you can see. Now, he would have been about 15 when Johnny Lee Clary was preaching Casino, and we were doing that thing. So he wouldn't have been influenced by that at all, like against it or whatever. But now with the internet, it seems like you don't have to know local people. he probably just jumped on stormfront.org, which is a full racist, skinhead, Nazi, website, and you can just jump on there and you'll get all the hate stuff you ever needed. And so you do get this element of the KKK, meathead, skinhead element in Australian society. We know from Cronulla, we've seen that. But there's always two sides to the story. And so say even in Cronulla, that was a retaliation against people getting bashed on the beach. And so what was happening is, people down the beach and obviously there's different cultures. This is where people talk about multiculturalism. It's actually multiracialism is usually what everyone agrees with. When it's multiculturalism, people go, well, I don't want that culture or that culture. And people don't like Aussie culture either. It's like we all have our different cultures wherever we go. And so, there might be a drinking culture or a whatever culture, but it's like multiculturalism is usually, that's where the clash is. Multiracialism, most people in Australia, in Melbourne, when I look at my school photos, it's like the United Nations. You got, I'm standing next to a Japanese guy, a Chinese guy. My best friend is Lebanese. He's very dark skinned. And there's Greeks and Italians, and Australia had the highest Greek population outside of Greece. If you went to Athens, that was the highest population of Greeks, then Thessaloniki, then Melbourne. And so lots of Greek fish and chip shops, food, and you just get to know Greeks and you get to understand a bit of the language. And I worked for 3 years with Greeks. I worked for my father, and so you just have no problem with people of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern. You just have to deal with that. That's part of being an Australian. But what you see happening in Australia is there is a leftist agenda that is sort of shutting out any type of criticism of sort of violence or whatever done by minorities. And so we've seen, say with the homosexual community, a small minority, but they've had a huge say in Australia, and people are bending over backwards to please what the homosexual community wants. And so I live in an area where it's one of the highest per capita or per head of population for homosexual couples and people getting married and all that. This whole area is it's called the rainbow region because we get a lot of rainbows, but it's for another reason as well. And so you walk downtown, you will just see people holding hands of the same sex and all that. It's just very common. Now, when I was visiting Joseph Chambers over in the United States in North Carolina, they were like, homosexuals moved in on the corner, and they drove for ages and ages and showed me this house. I said, he's a black homosexual. And I was like, yeah, man, it's on every corner here. Australia is very liberal. And so this is one of the things. People who aren't in Western countries think Australia is a Christian nation. We are so non-Christian. People look at Hillsong. That is just, Hillsong is just like plastic. Joel Osteen Christianity. It's just so fake and all the rest of it. But anyway, but this guy who did this massacre in Christchurch, he was actually a communist sympathizer. He said he agreed with a lot of communist Chinese ideology. He called himself an environmental warrior, which you usually don't get. He said he wasn't a conservative. So he's just sort of throwing a spanner in the works, and he's more like Antifa than the Trump guys. And this is the thing. It's like people want to pigeonhole people. They want to put them into categories. He said he's not a Christian, but over all the world, it's basically, over all the Islamic world anyway, they're saying that it's a Christian attack against... and so this speaks volumes, because people hear that and they think, well, let's attack on them, and so this can lead to bombings. And, I've gotten on here and talked about how, people who I know have met personally, their family being blown up in church bombings and things like that, and it's a terrible thing. So at the end of the day, regardless of all the politics and everything, as Christians, we are to love our enemies, to do good to those who hate us, to pray for those who use us, and all the rest of it. And we should never rejoice at someone's downfall like this. Now, I understand it's a nationalistic culture. The first war we were in was against the Ottoman Turkish Empire. As Australia as a nation, the Great War, we're fighting basically against that whole caliphate and everything like that, and it's still going on, because basically it's part of a larger plan drawn up by the British Empire. Winston Churchill, 1922, divided up the Middle East, divide and conquer. These guys are just going to fight each other till day dot, and so and while we extract their oil and use them and put puppets in and all the rest of it, it's just a game to the West. Americans, the British have been involved in this for years, but at the end of the day, we can understand all that, but we shouldn't be rejoicing in this. We should be praying for people who have been involved, for victims. We should, and I understand there is a whole media blackout about what's happening to Christians all around the world. I totally understand it. But this is in a Western country. I mean, you can get 1,000 people die in the Philippines. How many Westerners really care? I mean, most people just go to work the next day and they don't even talk about it. Where if 5 Aussies die somewhere, it's like everyone's talking about it. And it's just the way it is, So, so anyway, I'm just gonna jump down because I just had a comment here. So Kylie Mitchell said, "White nationalism is just us normal everyday people. They awake to corrupt governments and are patriotic about our country and our way of life. Our rigid Aussie way of life is being eroded due to multiculturalism. I wish the people would remove white from nationalism. Why is it colour orientated if it is everyday folk concerned about politicians? Anyone can be concerned over what's happening and the changing of our culture, but they don't have to be white. They just have to be concerned that Australia is changing, so that it is no longer Australia." Understand, and that's the thing, anything gets labelled Nazi nowadays, white nationalist. I mean, things that I've just said in this thing, I've got, I've been to New Guinea 12 times, I'm married to a Pakistani woman, I don't hate other races, I don't specifically like other cultures, and it's exactly what Kylie was saying there. Many times that's blurred, and multiracialism is fine, multiculturalism, you don't have to accept that. And now if you don't accept it, you're a racist, sort of thing. And the thing is too, being a Christian, being a Buddhist, being a Scientologist, being a Muslim, whatever you are, I mean, that's not a race. If someone comes against the Scientologists, you're not coming against white people in America. There's plenty of black people there. There's plenty of Asians who believe that, So, and I think that is a problem. And that's one of the things is, people do feel that. They feel that there is the white racialism thing. But on the other hand, that doesn't negate the fact that there actually is white racism and white people. I know tons of people in Melbourne, Nazi skinheads, who have the Stormfront tattoo on their shoulder, the Australian flag, on their chest, and they hate everyone except for white people, and that's still going to be there. And so that's one of the things is when you see that type of racism and you name it, sometimes it's like, yeah, but hang on, everything's called racism nowadays. It's like, yeah, but we shouldn't fall into the same category error that they fall into. And so, but I understand that nationalism is fine, but that's why I'm saying, okay, I understand there's all these sides, but at the end of the day, we need to be Christians, we need to be Christ-like, and we need to love our enemies. So this is one of the things where Johnny Lee Clary, now he was the leader of the KKK, he was a racist, and he got converted by a black preacher. If you don't know his testimony, just type in Johnny Lee Clary, You can watch videos on YouTube and everything. Now, I didn't know, when I was saying before I didn't know much about him, I knew his testimony, but I didn't know that he had, you know, run Kenneth Copeland's program twice. I would have been like, hey, this guy's a Word of Faith guy, and I didn't know all that at the time. I just knew of his testimony, wanted him to speak because there were issues happening in this area. Just locally here, there was 13 crosses burnt at an Aboriginal mission, and people were dressed in clan gear. People were telling me stories about how they would, one white girl, she went out with a black guy. She was bashed by a whole bunch of guys wearing clan outfits. And, these were real stories. People coming to me crying, bawling their eyes out, telling me this story. People who I'd known since childhood telling me that they were in their local park. There was a van full of guys with the hoods chasing them around the park, trying to run them over. So this was real, this is a real thing. And so when Johnny Lee Clary came, it was like, man, he can preach about this and he can come against this. And he actually did a really good job. But one of the things is, I got to know Johnny quite personally, and he wanted me to help him with his Wikipedia page because it kept getting deleted by, David Duke fans and, the white supremacists and all that. And so I was helping him with that and helping him put up the Reverend Wade Watts page. So that it talked about Reverend Wade Watts because they kept deleting that as well. So we basically solidified those two pages, and who knows what's happened since then. I look at some of these pages I put up 10 years ago and they've just been dwindled down to nothing. That's the problem with Wikipedia. But Johnny Lee Clary, when I started reading through his website, and so I think it's johnnyleeclary.org or .com or something like that, I'm reading all these amazing stories and testimonies, and then I'm reading that he really likes Ann Coulter. And I'm like, okay, Ann Coulter, she's a bit of a nut, but and so I'm reading through some of the stuff, and then I'm like, hang on, Johnny Lee Clary has sort of been involved in a terrorist group called the KKK, and he saw the light. He got saved, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go and preach the message that this group is a cult, and the way he got out of it was a black guy preached to him, loved him for many, many years, and he eventually, softened, circumstances changed. And if you've ever seen American History X, the last 10 minutes are basically based on Johnny Lee Clary. When he left the Klan, he's found out his girlfriend was an FBI informant. He had all these problems. So he got out of a cult through someone loving him and being kind to him and showing mercy upon him and just the love of God. And, that's Christianity. But then I'm reading his website and he's saying it's good to bomb all these countries. And he's talking about Afghanistan, Iran. And I'm like, hang on, it is not computing here. So you're saying that you're involved in a cult, that, vicious cult. We all know about the KKK and what they do. Some Christian guy wins you out of that, and you go around and you're saying, yes, all peace, love among beings, and let's love people. And then there's another cult that is going around doing bad things, and there's all sorts of branches of that. And you want to kill them. Like, imagine if people had the same idea of the Klan. Let's just shoot every one of them. It's like he is not using the same experience that he experienced from the love of God from this black preacher. He's not showing that to people who are involved in other groups. And the more I got to talk to him, he didn't want anything to do with it. And he was just talking about it, and I shared my views on eschatology and last days, and I said, look, I believe that the Bible says in Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, that this guy might actually read that. We've got the Bible right here. It's a very interesting scripture, and when you read Micah chapter 5, it talks about the Assyrian, and so it comes from this area. It says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun. That's verse 12. Chapter 12, sorry. It says, I stood upon the sand of the sea, chapter 13, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, on his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast that I saw was like unto a leopard. So we understand that it says he was like unto a leopard, his feet were like unto a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. So we understand the mouth of a lion is Babylon, the basically modern day Iraq. We understand that the feet of a bear is the Medo-Persian Empire, it's modern day Iran. You understand the leopard to be the Assyrian Empire. And so this is the region that this comes out of. And so, that's why people talk about in the Middle East, ISIS and things like that. It's like, well, that's pretty much the exact location of where this beast comes from. And so we understand they're giving the mark of the beast. If you don't take it, it's off with your head. There's a whole bunch of symbols. So I'm talking about this sort of stuff generally, Clary. And I'm not seeing in him, like, we got to reach these people. It's like, we've got to kill these people. And I'm like, that's not the conclusion that I've got. God loves these people. God, regardless of what they're involved in, regardless if they're involved in the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, whatever cult they're involved in, God loves them and God cares for them. And it's like, anyway, I think this is a problem in Christianity, and what we see is nationalism in Australia, nationalism in America is a huge issue, and people need to pull back and say, okay, Jesus said to love my enemies. Okay, so write a list of all your enemies. Write it down. I've got to love them. And people are like, wow, it's the whole army thing. What if they come to your door and they're going to rape your mother and kill your kids? And it's like, well, just read the Fox's Book of Martyrs. Were all those people wrong? Was Jesus wrong? He said turn the other cheek. He didn't revile back. Did the disciples fight back? Did anyone in the Fox's Book of Martyrs? Usually people like Zwingli are frowned upon for fighting back, and so I think this is a whole element of Christianity that's not seen. And it's interesting, a friend of mine put on my Facebook wall, because oftentimes I'm talking about textual criticism, and he said, look, the last 12 verses of Mark, that would probably come against some of the supernatural elements within Christianity. We've got the 5 signs that follow those who believe. And, just to quickly run through them, you've got speaking in tongues. Obviously, that happened in the church. And, I'm a continualist. I don't believe in cessationism. I believe these things are exactly the same as what happened in the book of Acts today. There's nowhere it says, okay, well, and that was it. John, was praying for people and said, oh, hang on, it's not working anymore. Oh, it's run out. It's like, it's just silly, and so to me it's silly, and to me the whole entire modern church is trying to base itself on this church that's after the Bible instead of basing itself on the book of Acts church, or the church that Jesus established and doing what he did. It's like, okay, well, we've got to do everything after that. So there's no more apostles, which just in Latin just means a missionary. There's no more prophets, which just means you profess. Like they've got all these false definitions. They're crossing out. There's no more gifts, but there's one called faith. We'll keep that one. And it's all over the place. And it's because it's a extra biblical doctrine. To be a cessationist, you have to have extra biblical revelation. You won't get that straight from the Bible. So that's why people try to put me in a John MacArthur camp or try to put me in a Bethel camp or whatever. I don't fit into any of those camps. I just stick with the Bible and what the Bible says. And so we see these signs that follow those who believe in my name. They will cast out demons. They'll speak with new tongues. They'll lay hands on the sick and they'll recover. We see that's still pretty much happening everywhere. Lots of fake groups doing it. Lots of good groups doing it. It's like But then there's the 2 where it says if you drink anything deadly, it won't hurt you. Now I understand that to be more so, the drinking of a cup was very important to Jesus. And so, he said, Father, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. And so, the cup was to do with, I will drink this cup, I will die, I will suffer martyrdom. When the 2 disciples, the mother went up and said, can one sit on your right hand, one on the left in the day? And Jesus said, look, it's not my decision. But are you able to drink the cup that I drink? And they're like, yeah, we will. And Jesus knew that they would, but but the thing is, it's a very hard thing. It's talking about death when you read that in context. So when he's saying drink any deadly thing, something that will kill you, it's talking about martyrdom. These are the signs that follow the church. And so it's not just someone just drank some Omo or something, or ate a Tide Pod and they're on the ground and someone prays for them and they're fine, or they didn't have any reaction. It's talking about martyrdom. This is a common theme in the church. These signs follow those who believe. It's not like the Bible just makes something weird up. And so the other one is the taking up serpents. Now, this is clarified in Luke, I think it's chapter 19, where it says, they will take up serpents and scorpions and all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt them. So it's talking about all the power of the enemy. Obviously, the serpent is from the beginning. He's the devil. People are like, it's talking about snake handling. And that's what, James White and John MacArthur, and, they usually try to throw out the last 12 verses of Mark, and, 1,700 manuscripts have it. Vaticanus and Sinaiticus don't. And they actually have the room for it. It's like, obviously someone just didn't fill it in, But no, they shouldn't be there. And you're an idiot if you think otherwise. And, James White will say, what doctrines change? What, snake handling? And all this. And same as John MacArthur, these guys just have no respect for the Word of God. They just, anyone who says you can take the mark of the beast and just repent, you're still safe if you take the mark of the beast. I mean, that's just pure insanity. That's what John MacArthur said. And so, anyway, I'm going to move on from this topic, but I think what we're seeing is just to summarise, what we're seeing is the Bible is being attacked, the words of Jesus are being attacked. These signs will follow those who believe. Martyrdom is part of Christianity. You will be hated. Look at the book of Acts. They weren't forming armies and militias and sharpening knives and preparing for the tribulation and all this sort of stuff. It's like they were just, many times Christians are sitting ducks. And it just is amazing to see these American-style Christians, the hate preachers, they're stocking up weapons for the last days and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, man, have you read the Bible? They just cherry pick a few verses here and there, and they have their militia, and they will shoot you, and they will shoot anyone who doesn't look like them. And so anyway, I'm going to move on from here. But yeah, this guy, this murderer, was definitely not a Christian, and he was a white supremacist. That's pretty much what he says in his manifesto anyway. And he's probably going to go to jail for a long, long, long time. But I think we need to not jump on the political bandwagon, jumping on this side and that side, because that's what the media wants. You're just constantly thrown across the room, like 1 minute you're left, 1 minute you're right, 1 minute you're nationalist, next minute you're not. And it's like, let's be Christians. God loves everyone. God even loves the media who lie to us the people who write those articles every day, and the people who are pushing agendas. God loves them. I'm not saying to ignore what they're saying or whatever, and if you want to get involved in that, that's fine, but it's like, what I'm saying is people need to understand that we will suffer persecution as Christians. We'll be lied against. People who slander you, persecute you, say all kinds of things, untrue things or true things, whatever, against you falsely. Well, against you falsely means untrue. For my name's sake, love them. Do good to them. Bless them. That's what Jesus taught anyway. So, Cardinal Pell. So this has been an interesting thing. We've watched Cardinal Pell sort of go down the slippery slope of being accused of being a pedophile to the final outcome of being proven that he's a pedophile. Now, I understand sometimes the courts can be wrong, and, there are people in jail, well, many people have been in jail for years and years and wrongly accused and all the rest of it. But I think this is a bit of an open shut case. It's just amazing. This reaches to the top level. Now, I put a photocopy of, or a picture of, there was an Aboriginal lady. Obviously, she used words that talking about white privilege and things like that. So there was a few words that would trigger people. But at the end of the day, she had a really good point. She's saying, well, how come in these outback communities, there's talk about, child molestation, they bring in the army. They put the whole place on lockdown. It's like martial law straight away. So here we have the Roman Catholic Church. Now, I've been street preaching for many, many years. I get people coming up to me all the time saying, I was molested by a priest. All the time. And when people tell me, oh, the church is full of pedophiles, I say, yeah, exactly. That's why I have nothing to do with those churches. I just agree with them because there's so many people saying this stuff. And it's a plague. And this has been going on for 700 years. You know, the Lollards, they used to write about the priests and how corrupt they were. Wycliffe wrote about this. Desiderius Erasmus, he wrote about this. Martin Luther, these guys are, they're all having sex with each other, and it's because, they've got all these restrictions on them. They have to be these celibate guys, and they're all together, and they've got all these young boys around them, and it's just like, it's a recipe for disaster. But that's what we say. It's for 700 years, these have been the complaints in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, one of the amazing things is, Cardinal Pell will do this. People just say, you're a Christian, so you are to blame. It's like, man, I'm not a Catholic, It's like, when it's someone who's basically an atheist, like say the Las Vegas shooter basically said he's an atheist, we don't go out there and say, oh, you atheists, just murder. Sometimes we say that, to sort of reverse the whole argument, just to show them how dumb it is. It's like, Stalin and, Pol Pot and Mao and some of the worst people, massacres and, millions, hundreds of millions of people have been killed in the name of atheism. Last century was one of the worst centuries for mass killings, and the vast majority of these mass killings were done under the guise of atheism. And so, so Cardinal Pell, he's done this. Obviously, people say, "Oh, Nick, what do you think of Cardinal Pell? What do you think of what's happened?" And it's just like someone in Scientology getting caught doing this. It's like, these guys have nothing to do with me. Just because they, imagine if Scientology just turned around and started naming things as Christian, and they said, "Oh, our leader is called the Messenger, and our people are called the Church," or they call themselves the Church of Scientology. Doesn't mean they're a church at all. It's just a cult. Same as Roman Catholics, it's just a cult. Now, Martin Luther broke away from that cult and brought a lot of people with him, but there's always been Christians. There's always been the Waldensians and many other groups that have been throughout Europe and throughout the world who have believed in the Bible, the simplicity of the gospel, and these other government juggernauts, Herodian systems, they spring up all the time. And that's what we see in America. What you got to understand in America, the president is like the Pope. And so as soon as the president is in power, he's a Christian all of a sudden. No matter if he's, saying the most daftest, telling, his friend he's going to grab this woman on their private parts and all. It's just like, this guy's obviously just not a Christian, But he holds up the Bible every now and then, hallelujah, and all this, and gets the, Paul the White and all these other false prophets in to pray for him, and he's playing the game. And, Christians understand that. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people deceived by that. And so just like Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, it's a place, the Romans sort of ruled the whole area of Rome and Germany and lots of Europe and France and so the Roman Catholic Church, it has this Herodian spirit, and so it's very similar to, American. Basically, if Donald Trump basically said, "I'm a spiritual guy," he probably couldn't nowadays. But if he, came out and just like a pope or a Caesar type of guy and just said, "Hey, we've got our own church, our American church, and if you're not part of our American church, you're not a real Christian," and all that. It would probably go really well. It would be very popular. But we see that whole spirit, the whole Roman Catholic type spirit. It's that nationalistic type of thing. It's in America, and it's very sad to see a lot of Christians just defending that and fighting this whole battle from that angle. And Trump can do no wrong, and Trump's our savior, and Trump this and Trump that. And it's just like, his wife made lesbian porn. She's not like coming out saying, I'm born again. I've got a testimony. I used to do all that stuff, but now I don't. And Jesus saved me. These guys are just still doing pretty much what they used to do, but they've gotten a bit older and they've stopped doing things publicly. It's like, it just amazes me that people think this guy's a Christian and defend him and promote him and say how good he is and everything. But Cardinal Pell, 6 years jail, not enough. He should have been given 20 years minimum. He'll probably die in jail. I think he will. Now, one of the things is Cardinal Pell was the go-to guy for any claims against the Roman Catholic Church. So basically here in Australia, he was the guy you go to say, look, I've been raped by Father Bob over here, and he said, okay, well, we'll give you 50 grand if you just shut your mouth, so they give him 50 grand. And now a lot of these cases, you can't sort of bring them up again, And so this is the thing, what they should do is overhaul everything. They should go back through from the beginning, and these victims should be paid by the Roman Catholic Church. And so there should be a certain set of money that these people get. I mean, it's the only punishment you can really give to the Roman Catholic Church. And I think too that there has to be certain guidelines. I mean, I would not allow priests to be alone with any kids. This is what I'm talking about. In the Aboriginal community, they put it on lockdown with the military, and no one goes anywhere and all this. But that's from their point of view. They're looking at it going, hang on, these influential rich white guys, they get all these, Tony Abbott saying, hey, this guy's a good guy, and Morrison, he's writing letters saying, Cardinal Pell's great, and was it Morrison? No, it was Tony. What's his name? Howard. And so they're writing all these letters, and it's like, from their perspective, they're like, we're under martial law for that sort of stuff. These guys are getting accolades from everyone, saying that how good they are. And they've been proven as child rapists. It's just, but that's the double standard that I was talking about and pointing out. There is this double standard. Anyway, sort of a bit over talking about politics in Australia, and it's sort of pretty boring. But the whole thing with Cardinal Pell is he was in the Hillsong conference probably about 10 years ago, and he was saying that people need to forgive the Roman Catholic Church. They need to stop being critical of the Roman Catholic Church, and they need to ask for forgiveness. So 30,000 people at the Hillsong conference got down on their hands and knees and were praying with Cardinal Pell at the pulpit. They were praying and asking God for forgiveness for being critical against Rome and the Roman Catholic Church. And so doesn't that show you the discernment of Hillsong? Doesn't that show you how dumb Hillsong is? Doesn't it show you how unchristian Hillsong is? I mean, what are they doing with the Roman Catholic Church in the first place? I mean, in year 2000, they were the band for the Pope. Pope's coming to Australia. It's like, okay, we'll get Hillsong. It's like, we know Darlene Check. She went and visited the Pope, said it was one of the most amazing moments of her life. And, she sang a whole bunch of songs for the Catholics and saying that we need to unify and all this. And so it's just a doctrine that's deeply embedded into Hillsong. Having Cardinal Pell speak there is wrong in the first place. Having now he's convicted of pedophilia. Having him tell everyone that they're too critical of the Roman Catholic Church. So are Hillsong going to retract that now? Are they going to write a letter saying, look, we denounce everything, every connection to Pell, he's a pedo, this is wrong? No, they won't do that, because of Frank Houston, who basically started the whole thing, it was known that he's raped 14 boys, and that was just being covered up in Hillsong. And so people say, it hasn't been covered up. Brian talks about it all the time. No, Brian, when he's put on the spotlight with all the media, it's like, so your father raped all these boys. It's like, yeah, it's just terrible, and I'm a victim too, because, he's my dad, and it's like, no, you covered it up. You were the head of the OG. You should have done something about it. And he knew that if he actually dobbed on his father, he'd go to jail. His dad would go to jail. So he didn't dob on him. And basically he said, I had to pull him out of preaching. He couldn't preach anymore. No, if you go online, you can still see where he went and preached. And you can listen to his sermons. And I've had people contact me saying that they had Frank Houston preaching in their church, and while they were in the prayer line, he was touching boys on their genitals. So he's a wolf. He's this is totally unheard of. Even imagine if this was in the Boy Scouts or something like that. They would try and at least stop this. But this is like, okay, this guy's been caught, raping the kids and all that, and we'll put him out of ministry. We'll write a letter about it anyway. We'll just let him go after a little while. He'll do whatever he wants anyway, because he's the leader. He's running the whole thing anyway, and it's just insane. So this is the state of popular Christianity in Australia. That's why I don't affiliate myself with any group. I affiliate myself with the Bible and with genuine Christians who I meet. And so I don't know if they're a genuine Christian just because they go to ABC denomination. I've no idea. I've been to churches and I'm like, man, these people are weird. These people are wacky and they say weird things and unbiblical things. I'm like, man, yeah, but the denomination's good. I've been to other places where the denomination should be bad, and they're like, we're all getting along. And it's like, hang on, these people from the Revival Centre, which I've been at loggerheads with for years up in New Guinea, and they invited me to preach, and they said, man, we have been coming to that conclusion for years and years and years, and they said they want to break away from the main Revival Centre because they teach against that sort of thing. But anyway, I'm going to move on because I've got a little bit to touch on. So now, I'm in the process of writing a book. So if you haven't read my Revelation 16:5 article, basically it's a rebuttal against James White's book, talking about how Revelation 16:5 should read Holy One. I've put a lot of work into this, and it come to the conclusion that every manuscript points to the reading of esomenos, which means shall be. So if you want to know more about that and more about the accuracy of the fine details of the Textus Receptus and of the King James Bible, which is an exact representation of the Textus Receptus, you can download my book for free at the moment, because I guess it's going to be put on Amazon. It's going to be a published book, so I will probably be advised to pull it off the free list. But there's a whole bunch of other stuff I'm putting into this book. That's why I haven't just done it straight away. I've gone through it and realized that there's certain pieces of information that the dots don't connect as well as I thought they did. And so I've gone over the book a few times, quite a lot of typos in it, and I did write it in a hurry when I was living in Pakistan. So anyway, I'm doing that book, and I'm also doing a book on Easter. So this is one of the books that I wrote back in, or articles that I wrote back in 2004. I think it was 2006. Sorry, it was published in 2006. It was written in 2004 in Christian Witness Ministries magazine, Contending Earnestly for the Faith. And so that was the first article. So I've done 3 since then. I've done a few videos. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to culminate all that information and put it into book format. So it shouldn't be that hard, but it will take a little bit of time. So that's the second book that I'm working on. And then, so basically all the documentation for those books are done. I've just got to basically just put them in the right order and all the rest of it. But last night I was absolutely convinced that I need to do a book on the last 6 verses of Revelation. And so this has been a thorn in the side of the church for many years, where people believe that Erasmus back-translated from the Latin. So this type of concept is, it's ridiculous. I'm going to show today, as we're going to be going through a little bit of James White stuff, and so we're going to talk about that. And so that's basically the book that I'm going to be working on this year, in a sense, where I'm going to be going through everything that I can on the last 6 verses of Revelation, and proving that Erasmus didn't back-translate from the Latin for the last 6 verses, that he did have other Greek manuscripts. People say he only had one manuscript. I've already basically proven that he had many manuscripts, but so that'll be put into book format. And so hopefully, the first book goes well, second book goes well, and then the guy who's basically sponsoring me to do these books will want to go with this one as well. So I just thought I'd announce that. I just want to mention there was a bit of talk this morning in the Confessional Bibliology Facebook page about books about the translators. Now, there is the book Power and Glory. I think I've got it here somewhere. No, I don't. Power and Glory, which is basically called God's Secretaries in the United States. Now, I read that many years ago. It's a good book. I mean, if you understand it from a secular point of view, you'll be reading about the translators, and it will say all these, factual things about them. Then it's like it'll just focus on something and just say, well, yeah, they were selfish, or apparently one guy walked out of the church one time in disgust and went to the pub, and that they're sort of things that are highlighted. Is you can understand this guy's trying to sensationalise it like they do with all the royal family stuff in the UK. But this one's good too. It's called The Cradle King. It's secular, but if you want to know about King James, where he came from, all about his mother, but it does have sections in it about his lovers and things like that, which is a load of rubbish. When you read through it, it's like, just because he called someone his favourite, Henry VIII had favourites. You don't say he's gay, it's like, it's just ridiculous. And so, but there is, if you want to know more about King James and how he's not a homosexual, watch the YouTube clip. Just type in The Real Story of King James by Phil Stringer, and it goes for I think about 35 minutes, and it's a great watch. It's just meaty, it's straight to the point, and he just says, look, I used to think he was too, but then I started reading all the sources, and then he comes to the conclusion that the guy is basically saying David and Jonathan were gay, George Washington and Jesus. That's where this information is coming from. It's not coming from Christian sources. And so we just got to be careful with that. So I just thought I'd throw that in the mix. The Cradle King, interesting read. There's a few other good books on the market. Or if you go to my website, tr.org.au, if you go to the links, which is on the right-hand side, or you can go to the bottom of the page, there's a link to the biographies of the translators. You can just read through them, and it's a very good website, and I highly recommend that. Or there's actually, I listened to a series the last few years, and it's called Like Flint Radio. And so if you type in Like Flint Radio and type in King James Bible translators or just King James Bible or whatever, it should come up, and there's I think 20 MP3s you can download, or you can listen to it on their website or whatever, and it's all free, and it's done by an Australian guy from Queensland. He's not the best speaker, and he tries to be too Aussie. He's like, yeah, fair dinkum, mate. He's a bit too Aussie in what he says. He doesn't make it palatable for an international audience. But very good information. And at first you can tell he's got a bit of this sort of stuff in him. He's just basically reading what he's read. But after a while you can see maybe people wrote in and were correcting him and saying, look, you're parroting stuff that's not true. And eventually he has a really deep respect for the translators, and he's like, man, I'm shocked at how much these guys knew and the doctrines they believed, and how dedicated they were, and all the rest of it. And so he's not a King James only guy. It sounds like he's like an NIV sort of guy, but he does a pretty good job. It's worth a listen if you just want to if you want something to go through. With that, each one goes for maybe about an hour, and so you've got 20 hours of a whole bunch. I think it's actually 26. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of teachings there. So. And just about basically the King James Bible. So he goes into the background, Mary, Queen of Scots, goes into the whole background of the Reformation period, and right up to when King James is put in, different Bible versions and all that sort of stuff. And so you get a good general overview of all that. Then he goes through the bios of the translators, which is quite interesting. Okay, so where are we going now? We're recently on Facebook. Now I might be able to get this up. I put up a diagram of a dartboard, and now I'd spoken about this diagram, and I hadn't had time to do anything, and I did this in Paint. Paint is like the worst bog standard program you can do any type of graphic work on. And so anyway, I did this in paint, and so it's very, oh, actually I'm watching myself live, that's weird. Just taking a while for that. So in this dartboard diagram, what I do is I basically point out my thoughts on the Bible issue of where on the dartboard would be the bullseye and what would be outside of the dartboard itself. And I think I've explained this a little bit recently, but the internet here is really slow. So basically I have on the outside of the dartboard, I have the critical text, and then I have the majority text. But then I go on to go inside the dartboard, so within the closed class of Textus Receptus editions, you've probably got like the Complutensian Polyglot, which is probably on the outside, and then you've got the 5 editions of Erasmus. You're getting a bit further in, Then you've got the text of Stephanus. You're getting closer, and then you've got the text of Beza. You're getting closer. Then you've got specifically the 1598 of Beza, which is the one that they say is the one that the King James translators used, and then you've got the text of Scrivener, which was basically the one that the King James translators didn't print, but 250 years later, Scrivener's like, I'll print this one, and but use the English Bible to do that. And then right in the middle, in the bullseye, you have the King James version. Now, picture paints 1,000 words. There you go. So I've just described all that. So hopefully you can see that. So you sort of got the critical text. Now it falls short, doesn't hit the dartboard. And the majority text goes close, but doesn't. Complutensian is on the outside, and Erasmus's text, Stephanus, Beza's text, then Beza's specifically 1598, and you've got the Scrivener text. So Beza's one is very close. Scrivener's text is, probably the closest that you can get to a Greek text next to the King James, but the bullseye is actually the King James. And so I'll just go to another graphic that I put up recently. And so unfortunately you're going to see that backwards, but I'm just going to read this. So this is a book. Now, this is by David Cloud, For the Love of the Bible. So he talks about those who have defended the readings of the Bible against the critical text and all the rest of it. Now, he talks about Hills. Now, Hills was a 5-point Calvinist. I'm not a Calvinist, but when someone does a better job than you've got to acknowledge that. And he summarises this, and I wish I had said this, but he says, the King James Version ought to be regarded not merely as a translation of the Textus Receptus, but also as an independent variety of the Textus Receptus. But what do we do in those few places in which the several editions of the Textus Receptus disagree with one another? Which text do we follow? The answer to this question is easy. We are guided by the common faith. Hence, we favour that form of the Textus Receptus upon which, more than any other, God, working providentially, has placed the stamp of his approval, namely the King James Version. Or more precisely, the Greek text underlying the King James Version. Now, he just summed it up. And so I'm sort of glad that, I'd read through some of this stuff earlier on, but hadn't grasped it. But I sort of come to this conclusion a whole nother way. But then reading this, I was just like, yes, this is exactly what I've come to believe. And it's basically the underlying text of the King James Version. It's the text underneath that that the King James guys didn't print. Now, had they printed it, there'd be no King James only movement. There'd be no, the King James doesn't follow the Textus Receptus, all this sort of stuff. And, these are just like a storm in a teacup compared to when you look at Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and the critical text guys are just, they're out there in a hurricane, and but I just thought I'd throw that in. And so the dartboard diagram basically explains that. I might go full screen. I'll see if I can. It might be a bit easier for everyone. Don't think I can. I'll show that again anyway. So the dartboard diagram. So yeah, critical text doesn't hit the board, majority text doesn't hit the board, but then complutensian does, and these other editions. And when you follow the lines, you basically got the Beezer text comes very close. Scrivener text is underlying the King James, so obviously that's very close, but it's not perfect. Scrivener did a very good job, but not a perfect job. But we look to the King James Version. Now, I've been debating online just recently. Some guys are like, okay, which edition of the King James? So we go with the pure Cambridge edition, the 1900. So there's a guy called Matthew Verschure. He's from Geelong, and now he runs a website called Bible Protector. Now, Matthew and I, we don't really see eye to eye on a lot of things. A lot of things we do, but a lot of things we don't. And so it's funny, you know, with people who are very close to your opinion, but they're wrong. It's like they end up being your worst enemy, you know, sort of thing. And you hate them because it's just this one thing. If they only just changed that, that'd be good, you know, sort of thing. And but I've read everything that he's put out. I've listened to every audio that's come out of that in that website, and I've looked for other stuff and read everything that he said about the King James. I've gone through his argumentation, and I think it's pretty solid. That the Cambridge edition just fixed a whole bunch of errors and mistakes that were print errors in the King James, or deliberate errors that were brought in, or just, you know, sometimes there's something capitalized and in other editions it's not. And so the Cambridge edition, 1900 Cambridge edition, basically nails all those issues. And so so yeah, I just sort of say that because there's been some guys who are saying, you know, which edition, and going through all that. I've gone through those issues. You know, sometimes it'll be the difference between, I think it's in Matthew 27, where it has father, F-A-R-T-H-E-R, you know, you're going father, or further, F-U-R, you know, and so which one is it? But going through dictionaries, looking at things, father is talking about the distance, where further is, let's not take this conversation any further, you know, it's talking about abstract things. And so things like that, which when we're reading through the King James, we just see these things, and most of the time we understand in context what it means, but it's just very specific. And this is how much these critical text guys strain at a gnat and swallow a camel, where in one instance they're saying, you know, is it further or farther? See, you don't have the correct King James, and you've got an Oxford edition. It's not the, and it's like, dude, you know, their text has so many mistakes and errors and geographical blunders, and it's rubbish. It's like comparing the Jehovah's Witness Bible to the King James. It's just a piece of trash. And you know, I know when I say that, some people get upset because they do read the modern versions, but I've got to be honest, and I've got to be honest before God, that these Bibles are so filled with error, so filled with Gnostic teaching, so filled with mistranslations and deceptive ideas and anti-Trinitarian concepts and Arianism and Gnosticism. It's all in there. If you get a modern day Bible, you basically got a Gnostic Bible. The Gnostics didn't just, you know, throw the Bible out and write, you know, or some did, you know, they wrote their own books and Gospel of Thomas and other things. But it's like many of these Gnostics just changed the word. So we don't like that idea, we'll cross that out and we'll put in something else. And we're seeing that in these Bibles. Sometimes I'm going through doing a study and I look at another Bible and I'm just there going, oh my God. And then I understand why people are believing these things in churches and why pastors are preaching these things, because it's in their Bible. It's not in mine, but it's in theirs. And it's like, it's just crazy. So anyway, I thought I'd throw the dartboard concept at you. Now, as I take a break, it's just one of the things I talk for 2 hours straight, and in the end of it, I'm tongue-tied and get dyslexic, I call it, when all the words are upside down and you're trying to talk about technical things. But we're going to let James White have a chat. So what's happened is, I had a Twitter exchange with James White. So I'd been sort of a bit of a thorn in James White's side poking him a little bit and just saying, look, James, Revelation 16:5, this and that, and just giving him factual information. Now, he jumped on his Divine Line program and said, I was desperate, I'm obsessed, I'm sad, I'm, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, okay, whatever, when he writes about that stuff, it's good scholarship and all the rest of it. Anyone, someone can spend 30 years studying one concept, and James White will hold up their book and say, wow, this is amazing. But, if I spend a month going through that whole concept, Revelation 16:5, I'm just obsessed, and I'm an idiot and all the rest of it. But it just got, because he's trying to divert all the attention away now from Revelation 16:5, because he's realizing that he can't use that argument much anymore in his presentation against the King James Bible, and or King James onlyism, he calls it. And so that was one of his major trump cards. He would pull out Revelation 16:5 and say, see, they just make up words. Beezer just made this word up out of nowhere, and so I've proven all that wrong. And so he's just left there scratching his head going, well, what am I going to do now? And he's admitted that it's nomina sacra. Or that Beezer said it was nomina sacra. Well, he didn't know that before. I've taught him that, So instead of being teachable and going through it and having a reasonable conversation about it, I knew he wouldn't. As if I think the guy's getting to be teachable at all. I think he's one of the biggest wolves around. He's just a heretic. He is so off the wall. When I listen to him, I just cringe. I think, I can't believe people are listening to this guy for their spiritual nourishment, and running with his ideas and everything. It's just like, yeah, sure, he's got some interesting things to say about the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, so do Jehovah's Witnesses. Even secular historians can say all the stuff that he's saying. Historical things about Roman Catholic Church, believe this and believe that, and da-da-da-da. And, kudos to him. He does a good job at Roman Catholics and a few other things, but it's like, ultimately, he is coming against the traditional text, he's coming against the text receptors, and he's demonizing those who uphold the King James text receptors position. So anyway, he recently talked a lot about Erasmus in the last 6 verses of Revelation. So this is going to be the thing that I'm going to be focusing on this year. And so I sent him some information about Erasmus and said, look, he obviously used more than one manuscript, because he says here, and in his annotations he says this. He just blocked me. And so he jumped on his dividing line and basically said, finally blocked this guy, and he called me a cultist. Like a cultist for saying that Erasmus, because I've been reading Erasmus's annotations. Now, James White says that we don't, it's funny, like everything that I do, he gets on his program and says, you guys don't do this. And so I'll say, okay, we'll look at Erasmus with Revelation 16:5, and he said it was who was and is to come. He didn't say who was and is and shall be, but it's not who was and is and holy, like White wants it. So I'm talking about Erasmus's annotations in all 5 of his editions. And then James White gets on there and says, you guys don't read Erasmus and don't read his annotations. And it's like, well, that's exactly what it did. And it's almost like what we do, he just pronounces that we don't. What do you call someone like that? You call them a slanderer, you call them a liar, you call a spade, white supremacy. But I'm going to play this YouTube clip. Now, I've got my other phone. Now, I had a really good Samsung S7, and my wife had it, and she kept it perfect. She, didn't let any little blemish come on the screen, and she got a new phone, which I'm using now, which is probably why it's a bit clearer. And she gave me her older phone, the S7. I'm like, man, this is great. And all I did, because I dropped phones, like this is the phone that I'm going to be playing the YouTube through. It makes you not even want to touch the screen. It's that glassy. This other phone just fell out of my pocket, hit the ground about that far. Didn't even shatter the screen or anything. The whole thing just went purple. There's just nothing I can do about it. It's just wrecked. And so I'm back to using this old thing until I just grab another one. But it works, and so I'm going to play this YouTube clip, just the audio, and hopefully it'll be loud enough for you, and hopefully I don't have to, rewind or anything like that, because it's going to be almost impossible on this because it's just a small screen. Actually, I might go sideways there. It might help me. That's it. Okay, so I'm going to play some James White here, and in context, he's talking about Robert Truelove. He's talking about, what's his name, Stephen Anderson, but he does mention me, so I'll just sort of play it, and how he says that I'm a cultist, and also about the whole concept of Erasmus and the last verses of Revelation. So let's hear what James White has to say.
Right as I, sorry guys, we're going? Well, Chief Michael Perry says, they're behind? I'm behind. Oh, okay. But I'm going to put that down too, because it's just, I can't put that down, I just realized, because that's where this tweet is. Right before I got here, Matthew Eklund sent me 2 images, and I said I was going to address them, and if I don't do this, I will forget. And at least Twitter's working. He had a brief exchange with Robert Truelove, and again, this is on the issue of textual traditionalism, and the last program we did, we talked about, and we have talked about a number of times now, the fact that the Textus Receptus, as it exists today, was derived through the application of textual critical principles, including a large portion of the textual critical principles that we utilize today. There's no CBGM in the TR, for obvious reason, because it's based on computers.
Just want to say the whole CBGM thing, James White's saying the correct word of God will be available to us in 2013. And it's like, I laughed my head off the other day. Someone just said the CBGM is probably going to be like the Obamacare website. And, you crunch the numbers in and they're going to come out correct. It's just very interesting. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Erasmus frequently spoke of the kinds of scribal errors that are prevalent in antiquity. He talked about the corruption of the text. He used that terminology. So when people say that I should not be trusted in theology because I use the same terminology and define it as textual variation, and everybody has down through the years, I mean, Jerome and Origen and Augustine, and they all talk about the same things, but we were all just unreliable because of this one group of Calvinists.
That's not the whole story. Basically, what James White's doing is he isn't trying to, well, he claims he is. I'm trying to get back to what John said and what Paul said. But what he's doing, and the critical text guys, they are pushing a never seen before Greek text, which has been compiled by Westcott and Hort, which is a mix of the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus and just a handful of other things. It's a mix together. They've created this never seen before Greek text, and they're pushing this on the world and telling everyone that if you don't read this, you're not scholarly. If you don't read this, you don't have the true text and all the rest of it. And so we're sort of like, well, where was the Bible before that? Where was? And they're like, well, the Textus Receptus has all the readings, but it's got all these extra readings, and so you got like a 10,000 piece puzzle, but it's like there's an extra 200 pieces or whatever, and we're just getting rid of those 200 pieces and we're giving you the full picture and all this sort of stuff. And so James White is pushing an agenda. Now, the textual criticism that was done by Erasmus and Stephanus and Beza and the King James translators is way different to what these guys are doing. These guys are focusing on Vaticanus. So Vaticanus has become their main manuscript, and Vaticanus was known by Erasmus, and he said it was a fake. He said it was made in 1439. He rejected it. He looked at the readings. He lived in Rome. He was able to go to lots of libraries in Rome. He said it's not worth my time. He looked at over 350 variants there, and it was rejected by him. It was rejected by all the Reformation, and it was rejected by John Mill in 1707. And so the whole Reformation and post-Reformation rejected Vaticanus as just a piece of junk. But then they've resurrected and said it's the best manuscript. It's the one we need to go to. And so it's the reverse of what the type of textual criticism that Erasmus is doing, because Erasmus was rejecting texts that just have, people weren't using, they're just sitting there and no one's ever copied it, no one's translated it. Sure, there might be a few things here and there that sort of, it's like, oh, that's close or whatever in certain parts. But a wholesale translation of Vaticanus or Sinaiticus, just, they don't exist. They're not there, and so that's why they've amalgamated these two together to make them a little bit cohesive, but they actually had to borrow a whole heap of stuff from the Textus Receptus because Textus Receptus doesn't have all the wrong geographical locations that these guys have, and so, names and things like that. So they've gone into the Textus Receptus and just, we'll get the proper name. We can't have Jesus walking to this place. It's wrong, but Vaticanus, Sinaiticus have all these type of errors in it. So he's doing the opposite of what Erasmus is doing. And so, but he's trying to say it's textual criticism. So it's a bit like me saying, okay, the founding fathers of America, George Washington, these other guys, they are doing the same politics as the guys in China. Exactly the same. It's politics. Imagine if, he's basically saying textual criticism is like this blanket word that everyone's doing the same textual criticism. And he's sort of like, these guys were talking about texts. They're talking about errors in the texts and all this. So they're doing the same thing as we are. It's like, no, they were talking about errors in the text and showing that Vaticanus was a piece of rubbish that needs to be put in the bin. You guys are picking stuff out of a bin and resurrecting it, saying this is wholesome food. It's not. It's rubbish. And, it's just trash, and that's why we're seeing so much confusion in this world about where the Bible is. And if I was to ring up any minister in Australia, so okay, Reverend Bob or Pastor Smith or whoever, hey, where is the Bible today? Either in a Greek edition or Latin or Hebrew or English, or where is it? It would take ages for them to just define something. Most people couldn't. And then at the end, I'll say, so is that the Bible? Like, does it have all mistakes and errors? Oh, of course, we have lots of mistakes. Okay, so where are those mistakes? It's like, oh, well, you just have to do a study on textual criticism and you'll find out. Ring up James White, ring up Dan Wallace, and, most people wouldn't just say, hey, I had the Bible. I know where it is, I know where to find the words, and I have 100% confidence that God has been able to preserve his word. Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away. My words shall by no means pass away. Either Jesus is lying or what he said is true. His words will not pass away. Now, Dan Wallace and Peter Gurry and these other guys, they totally dismiss the whole doctrine of preservation, saying, well, not all of Jesus' words were preserved. I'm sure that he said a few other things other than what's written in the Gospels, and John says that you can fill the whole world with all that he said and did, and it's like, no, obviously it's what he wants us to know, and those words are the ones that won't pass away, not just, a general chit-chat. And it's amazing. This is what Dan Wallace believes, and so, anyway, we'll get back to James.
Which is really weird. But anyway, Erasmus did the same thing. Obviously, if you're promoting a text that was derived by the application of textual critical principles, and any Greek text has to be derived, unless you're just going to take one manuscript and not compare it to anything else and say, this is it. This is the one manuscript we're going to use. Then you're going to have to use textual critical principles. The TR is a text derived from textual critical principles. And if the modern critical text is to be rejected because of the utilization of textual critical principles, then so is the TR.
It's a bit like saying, well, these founders of America and the ones who wrote the Constitution and everything, they use certain political principles to come up with the reasoning that they had. So if you're against the principles used by the Russian, the Soviet Union, the Leninists and Stalin and everything. If you're against their principles, then you're against all principles, and you can't be against the principles that build this thing. And so, what he's saying is absolute nonsense. There is a huge difference between China, Russia, and their political system, and what happened in the United States. There's a huge difference. Now, both come under the umbrella of politics. He's basically trying to say that textual criticism is sort of like all the same. If you're looking at a Greek manuscript and you have another Greek manuscript, you have to do textual criticism. It's like, yeah, but that's James White and crew basically have about 50 manuscripts. Okay, they prefer Vaticanus, but they also have Sinaiticus, and they have these 50 others that they look at, and these don't agree with each other. It's like you got a stray cat here and you got a dog here, and they're all different. They're not. It's not like you're getting ones that are very, very similar. They're just different to the nearly 6,000 others, which are basically Byzantine, and so which is where we derive the text receptors from. And so it's pretty strange to say that to put all that under the umbrella of the text receptors. To put all that under the umbrella of textual criticism, because it's so different, and it's just like using the word politics for any type of politics. Nationalism. It's the same politics that they were using in Russia or China or in Africa. It's all the same, and it's not. There's massive differences between how things are done and how things panned out, and James White's just confusing all the issues here.
On the exact same basis, if you listen to Erasmus, if you read Erasmus, if you read Beza, if you read Stephanus, or at least look at those who've looked at Stephanus.
If you read Erasmus, read Erasmus. If you read Beza, read Beza. James White quotes Beza in his book and doesn't even know what he's quoting. He just Revelation 16:5. He didn't have any idea what Beza was saying, and so we're reading Beza. We're understanding what Beza said. We're reading his other notes. We're reading through Erasmus, and that's where we're coming up with these things. Because James White's getting on his show and just saying stuff about Erasmus. It's like, okay, well, look at the annotations and read it and translate it. And it's like, it's not what James White's saying. And so he's like, you don't read Erasmus. If you read these, yes, it's an accusation. And then he's like, if you read Stephanus, and it's like he's realizing, hang on, Stephanus didn't really write notes. And he's like, those who mentioned things about Stephanus, and it's like he's just got a very basic understanding of that whole era in the Reformation and the text, and so he's trying to make himself out to be an expert on Beza, an expert on Erasmus, but he doesn't really know anything about these guys. And what I'm going to point out today will show that.
This is just simple logic. It's simple logic. So we've been looking at that, and last program we looked at Revelation 14:1. We saw the error in the TR there. We looked at Revelation 2:2. We saw the error in the TR there based upon back translating from the Latin.
He always says it's back translating from the Latin. See, these guys believe that Erasmus only had one manuscript of Revelation called the Reuchlins Codex. Now, Erasmus did look at that, but he had other manuscripts that he used, and it's very clear that he used other manuscripts. But these guys don't like that, because that ruins their story. Don't let the facts get in the way of their story. And so he basically, what they do is they get the Reuchlins manuscript, and they read through it, and they go, hang on, Erasmus is different here. And they say he must have gone back to the Latin. It's just this conclusion they come up with. So he's like, they back translated from Latin. They back translate, and it's like, his proof is quoting other guys, not going back to Erasmus and looking exactly what Erasmus said, because That's all I was doing on Twitter. I was quoting Erasmus to him, and he's blocked me because he doesn't want to hear the facts that go against. If you were studying this stuff, wouldn't you want someone to disprove you? If you're wrong, you're like, oh man, I've been wrong. I'm so sorry. No, because he's got his narrative. He's just reading through it. He's like, no, this is the narrative, and it's like, hang on, you're saying this, it's wrong. Oh no, we've got to block this guy, and he's not interested in truth, and so.
To Greek on the part of Erasmus. And of course, there's always a way around everything. There's this TR guy. I finally muted him because it's sad to watch a cultist. Because this guy's cultic. Okay, I think he's the guy from down in Australia or someplace down there. Texas Receptus. This guy's cultic. Is it New Zealand? Wherever it is, I don't care. It doesn't matter what the facts are.
So he's from Australia, and the other guy's from New Zealand or whatever. But it's like, he's a cultist. Okay, so look, I understand. I can say some pretty controversial things or whatever. But when it comes to issues of textual criticism, I mean, I'm basically saying, okay, well, yeah, James White's saying, Erasmus said this. I'm like, well, actually, I just read Erasmus and he said this. So that makes me a cultist. And James White challenges people, saying, read my book and I challenge you to show me, where Erasmus said this. And so I go through and I'm like, well, he said it here. Oh, you're a cultist. It's like, he challenges people to do this. And he's like, I finally muted him. Now, if you were to go through my Twitter, I've been I've been firm, but I haven't been like, you're an idiot and all this sort of stuff. James White has, to me. But I've just been like, trying to be as factual as possible and just put the best argument as I possibly can. And so I've shown him 5 or 6 death shots into his argument about Granville Sharp rule, Revelation 16:5, this whole concept of Erasmus, Easter. I've just been one after the other. He's just muted me. He's just like, I'm over this guy. And what I've seen is this constant frustration, because it must be frustrating when you already have an argument and, he's written his book, he's got all his arguments here, and someone just comes along and just goes, well, from there to there's wrong. And it's like, this guy's making me look like an idiot, and he, in a sense, has been pretending to deal with what I've said. But he hasn't. He hasn't gone online and said, this is exactly what Nick's saying, and this is my argument against it. And he goes by tweets on Twitter and information that other people have said, and it's like, I haven't even said that, and so he's not directly just saying, okay, this is what he thinks, let's let everyone know what he thinks, this is exactly what he's going through, okay, this is my counter argument. He's not doing that, because how can you have a counter argument against what he said? It's basically exposing his book that even the pictures in it are wrong. it's pretty embarrassing, I guess, to say. And I don't know what that's like. I haven't printed, I would hate for me to publish a book, to bring it out, and it's sitting there for years and years and years, and then someone just comes along and goes, actually, that's wrong. And it's like, it's not hard to find out what's wrong. Most of these arguments are actually already old and they're on the internet, they're everywhere, but it's just James White's just King James only, and Stephen Anderson, and Ruckman, and King James only, and these heretics and these psychos. And so you come along and you're like, hi James, I've been reading your book and you're a little bit wrong. He's like, you're a cultist, you think like a Mormon, and you're just like, oh man. And even people within his own reformed group are just like, man, this guy's a bit of a psycho. he's just lost it. And I think he's lost it because I've compiled this information, but there's also just been the niggling thing of people like James Snap as just I don't agree with James Snap on lots of things, and I'm going to read through one of his articles and show where he's wrong today, if I can get to it. But James Snap just constantly just chips away a little bit at James White and just shows a little bit of error here, a little bit of error there, but just enough to build this big picture that James White has no idea what he's talking about. And so that as well, so sort of like everywhere he looks, he's wrong and easily proven wrong. And he's not turning around and saying, I've been wrong on this, and James Snap proved me wrong, or Nick Sayers wrote this thing, and now I'm wrong. He's just trying to fight it all and get madder and madder, and it's like, it's it's sort of sad to watch because it's the sign of someone who's just very desperate. But we'll just keep playing this clip.
So you can show where top-end scholars that this is what they do, document that Erasmus utilized 28:14, did not have a high view of Revelation, did not invest much time in it, and made errors. And it's like, oh, well, but he had access to other manuscripts. We may not know what they were, but he had access to other manuscripts. And
that's what Erasmus says. I can't change the fact that Erasmus said that. It's like, if I just said, Tony Abbott never goes for morning walks, and then someone just says, well, actually, it's here. King White, here he is, a video footage of him going for his morning walks. Like, that's not real. It's like, I've actually copied and pasted the Latin of Erasmus, and I put it on my Facebook so he can read it. I put it where he frequently goes. I'm like, here you go, James, and this is what's been said. I've shown him the clear bias of Jan Kranz in his book Beyond What Is Written, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But, he's like, these top scholars. No, James, these top scholars are just as fallible as you are, man. And I'm going through your book, shaking my head, just going, what? How come he's saying that? I've known that ever since I was a Christian, that's wrong. Just basic things. And so he's trying to defend the NIV and a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's like, and James. So anyway, we'll let James just continue, and then I won't go too much longer with James, and then I'm going to go into some of the issues to deal with the last 6 verses of Revelation. I'll just sort of summarize it, because I think the more I'm able to simplify these issues for you, it helps me too with my argumentation, or else I do a whole program on stuff, and sometimes I have to do a program on it to actually try and see that if what I'm saying is true and correct, and sometimes I get myself in a bit of a muddle with things, but eventually after a few programs, it's like, you get this nugget of how to say it and how to present it. And so anyway, we'll let James continue.
And that's where it actually came. You can make up an excuse for anything. I have seen Mormon missionaries do the exact same thing. It's the exact same mindset. The exact same mindset. That's my ultimate authority.
The exact same mindset as a Mormon? I'm quoting Erasmus. I'm not just saying Erasmus just said this from thin air. I'm quoting the guy. And he's saying that that's not reality. I'm just in fantasy land. I'm like a Mormon, just saying the Book of Mormon, that's it. That's why it amazes me that so many people follow James White, because he behaves like this. I'm not the only person he does this to. He does this to many people.
You cannot show me enough facts to ever, ever, ever disprove my ultimate.
And so he's basically saying that, all his stuff is fact, but his stuff is coming from a biased, critical text point of view. What I'm showing is, I'm showing him the exact reading of Erasmus, going right back to the source. Isn't that the whole thing? At Fontes, going back to the source, seeing exactly what's written. And that's what I'm doing with Erasmus. And he's like, you're off the wall. You're thinking like a Mormon. So no, I'm not the one who's just relying on Jan Kranz's argument, because I've known about Jan Kranz's book for a long time. I've gone through Jan Kranz's article on Revelation chapter 22 verse 19 and read through his argumentation against Thomas Holland, and I've been trying to go through that for many years, picking little bits out and just going through it so that I can write an article on it. And it's just gotten to the stage where this type of information has pushed me to, I'm like, okay, I'll find some stuff, and I've found some gems, and now I've got tons of information on this. And so I'm not just sitting back just going, King James Bible is the best Bible. I'm studying this stuff. I'm reading books about it. I'm quoting direct quotations from people in King James and going through hills and going through. I'm not just making this stuff up. I'm reading through the annotations of Erasmus. I'm reading through. I don't know anyone has James White read the text of Beza? Compared the differences between Beza and the King James, or Beza and Stephanus? Don't think he has. I've actually gone through and typed in to my website the first 7 chapters of Beza and showing where the differences are between that text and the text of Stephanus. Now, I stopped at 7 because it's like a lifelong work, but it's like every now and then I'll just do. He's not doing it. Yeah, he just assumes that I'm just. I actually put this clip of the deliverance, the banjo scene. I was just like, I'm just like this guy just sitting on the porch, like, hey guys, and playing this banjo song. That's how he tries to make out that I am. And I understand I'm from Australia. I don't have my P's and Q's, all, like James White would want me to. Like, I don't approach people like I'm a scholar or anything like that, because I believe that a layman can look at this information and see through it. Someone who just has a tiny bit of discernment can see through all this stuff in the King James only controversy. But it just amazes me. Anyway, we'll let James continue, or else I'll get riled up and just waffle on.
Authority. That's it. I will always come, and I'll make things up. I'll do whatever I have to do.
I'll make things up. I haven't proven anything.
And it's sad to watch. It's a
sad.
cultic mindset. That
Cultic.
guy. I'm not talking about Robert Trujillo right now.
That
I
guy.
hope people can pick that up. I'm talking about one particular guy who says, this is absolutely it, and no matter what, Revelation chapter 16 or Revelation 14 or Revelation 2, doesn't matter. There's always some way around it. Now, each one will involve different argumentation. So you've got one set of arguments for this verse, one set of arguments for this verse. It's totally incoherent and hence completely self-contradictory. And that's why almost nobody but this one guy believes what he says, but that's how it works. It's a scary thing.
Scary. So that's why Edward Hills, whose book is praised among Calvinists, because he's a 5-point Calvinist, I read you before, he said the Text Receptus, the King James Bible. Now, I understand, I don't agree with everything with Hills. I don't think anyone agrees with... James White doesn't agree with Dan Wallace. There's certain verses he wants to delete that James doesn't. There's certain verses that James wants to delete. So these guys don't agree with each other. He doesn't agree with everything that Jan Kranz says. And so and he's like, no one believes exactly what I believe. Well, that's because what I did with Revelation 16:5 is pretty groundbreaking. It's information it's not new. It was known to the scholarly generation of Beza and King James translators and everything. And I've dug that information up and I'm presenting it. And it's like, oh, no one else believes that. And as if what you present has to be just an accepted thing. And so this is where James White will talk about, where the remnant and all this sort of stuff, talking about himself. But then when it comes to the text, it's like, well, 95% of scholars agree with me, and the Roman Catholics agree with me, and these other groups agree. And so everyone just, on everything else, they're apostatizing. But when it comes to the Bible, it's reversed. And it's like, oh, well, they've all come and seen the light. That it's pretty dumb to believe that Text Receptus, which has been used for 2,000 years, it's pretty crazy to think that those manuscripts that back that up and the printed text is the Word of God, when we have this Frankenstein text from Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, which we can mold together and get a few little papyri, some as big as a postage stamp. And it's like, we got these papyri, it's like this backs up this one reading, but it doesn't back. It's got all these Byzantine readings in it, but don't mention that. And so anyway, I'll let him continue. As soon as I hear him say all this stuff, it just makes me go, man, this guy is teaching people about the Bible, and it's just like watching Satan there with a microphone. It's really, I guess, disheartening in a way. But yeah, just back to, because I'm sort of missing some of the points, I'm just ranting on a little bit. But when he's saying, okay, Revelation 16:5, obviously it's nomina sacra. That's what Beza said. Okay, so when we look at the issue of Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, Erasmus clearly said it was homoioteiton. That's fine. And so they're saying, oh, it's back translation from Latin. No, he said it was homoioteiton, and he examined that from looking at the Latin. Okay. But then when you look at Revelation 2:2, Revelation 14:1, all these other issues are basically just a whole list that don't agree with the one manuscript, the Reuchlins manuscript. So they just say, he went to the Latin. But Erasmus doesn't say that, but they just conclude that. That's their conclusion. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So that's why it's like, oh, well, what about all these other places? It's like, well, it's pretty clear that you're just going through and seeing where there's a deviation from the Reuchlins manuscript, and you're just saying he went to the Latin, which isn't true. And so, because the only place, basically where he said he went to the Latin, Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, isn't in the Reuchlins. So it's his whole argument is upside down. So anyway, I'll let him keep chatting.
So, anyway, here was the what was sent to me, and this was what within the last hour. That says 1 hour, so that's sort of like 1 hour to 2 hours in Twitter time. So Robert Truelove posted the following. But here is the question for any Reformed critical text advocate, which is the vast majority of all textual critical scholars in the Reformed community. Westminster Theological Seminary, Reformed Theological Seminary, and all of its campuses, everybody at Masters, everybody.
Everybody believes this. There's a lot of us, so, what does that matter? I mean, haven't there been times when the majority is wrong? Aren't we in an age where James White will admit there's just so much ignorance and apostasy around and all this stuff? I don't know why he does that. He seems to just reverse everything on the text issue. And it's like, there's a lot of us out here. And it's like, yeah, well, we're seeing the fruit of lots of these people. And even James White, it would say, there's a Calvinist remnant that's so, we're so small, but we're trying to branch out and reach people, and they're our brothers, but most of these people are dumb as a bowl. They're as dumb as a book, and these we're just this little remnant. But then when it comes to text issue, it's like, oh, we're all on the same page, basically. And just these sticklers, these King James guys, they're like probably 5%, and none of them have these scholarly degrees. I mean, put that into the situation of the young Earth creationist issue. So, I believe in young Earth creationism, but lots of people don't. And the majority of so-called Christians would believe, yes, maybe in creationism, but it'd be theistic evolution, that they do believe in a form of evolution, or they believe that the earth is millions of years old, and, all that sort of stuff. And so the minority is young earth creation. And that's like with the Bible issue, with the minority who believe in the text receptor's position. Does that make us wrong? He's just basically, it's like me saying to him, well, there's a whole bunch of theistic evolutionists. Well, everyone. If you go to name one scholar who's a young earth creationist. So, of course, they're marginalised. They're not allowed to speak. They're not allowed to have, their say in the science magazines and journals, because it rubs against the status quo. And so he's basically saying that, where are these scholars? Well, this guy had a PhD. This guy was pretty smart. Edward Hills. THD, actually. And so, but read him first, just to get a basic outline. He's a scholar. He was accepted. Anyway. See, that's the whole thing. It should be the argumentation, not like, well, these guys have scholarly credentials, so we've got to follow them. So, no, it's the weight of the argument. It's not the weight of who this person is, or he's the dean of some university. I've heard people who are university professors who say the dumbest things I've ever heard. And so I'm not saying that in every case, but James White will admit that. If you're looking at the issue of evolution, I think Dawkins, he's well educated, he's well respected, but he's totally wrong. And so you can't just appeal to scholarship. You've got to go back to the sources.
I do not know of a single person who holds Robert Truellove's position who teaches in a Reformed seminary. There may be one. I don't know who they are. Okay, the vast majority.
Because people like James White are pushing them out.
This is a
King
question
James
for all,
onlyists.
This is
King
a
James
question
onlyists.
for all Reformed textual critical scholarship, basically. Since we confess the Scriptures that we are to appeal unto them for all matters of faith and practice. And by the way, the difference in how to spell, for example, Erasmus didn't understand the difference between the aorist and present tense stems for ballo. And so we always misspelled them. That's not a matter of faith and practice.
Notice, see, James White, I've actually seen him get on his program, and only 10 minutes before I've tweeted something to him, and he reads it out. It was actually from this book that he's promoting, and he read the whole thing out, just like it was as sure as the Bible. And I knew it was a concept that he didn't know about. That's why I was sharing with it, because he's like, the Greek text. I said, well, Beezer said the Syriac was very weighty, and in many places it was just as good as the originals. And so I sent that to him, and he read it like 10 minutes later, And this is the thing, this whole thing with bolo, which basically just means, to cast out or to throw. It's like a, ball. So, Erasmus, he didn't know Greek now. It's just like one of the best Greek scholars ever didn't know Greek. It's like, are you serious, dude? And see, the thing is, he makes these claims, and you're like, oh, I don't think that doesn't sit right with me. It's just a bit like Einstein didn't even know anything about oxygen. It's so dumb. It's like, hang on, okay, well, I'll have a look. And so you study these things, you send the information to him, he's like, you're a cultist, you're off the wall. It's like, man, what are you talking about? So anyway, I'll let him keep chatting.
Okay, right? Erasmus's ignorance of the difference between the present and aorist tense stems of ballo is not a matter of faith and practice. That's not what the Westminster Divines or the Reformed.
So the thing is, he would have just read that from Kranz's book. Probably that morning. He's probably like, read something and go, wow, I'm going to say that on my show. And so he says it, but it's not something that he will, focus on. It's written there in some scholarly book, and that's true. It's like, it's not up for debate. It's not like, if anyone can show me, something wrong here, and this is one of the things, a sign of a false teacher, is they're not there saying, if you can show me where I'm wrong, I'm teachable, I'm open, please, you listen to my... See, this is one of the amazing things. When you get pastors and leaders and, popular people who constantly have a mouthpiece, many of these people don't realise that the best resource is the people who regularly listen to them. What they need to do is say to them, if you're realising that I'm saying something is wrong or just something that's off the wall or whatever, please tell me, write to me, even if it's in secret or anonymously, or let me know. One of the most disheartening things is, I remember, I went and visited this preacher one time, and I'd pretty much exhausted all of his material. I'd listened to every single thing he'd said in the last 10 years, read it all, read his books, went through everything. So I visited him, and what does he do? He wants to tell me just stuff over and over. I'm just sitting there thinking, well, it's a bit of a shame he's not more inquisitive and asking me, like, what did you think of that book? Or what did you think? Because I would be the best critic to say, look, I think this and I think that, and I think perhaps you're wrong here. I think, it's... But he's just sort of like more preaching, and everything that he said I'd heard before lots of times, and I'm just there going, yeah, cool. I'm polite and I just go, yeah, cool. And I don't usually try and force, the conversation to go in a certain direction unless I'm really led to do that. And so then, his son, it was the same thing. I'd read his stuff, and so he's telling me all this stuff that I've already read and I already know. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. Yep, that's cool. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, they've actually wasted a huge opportunity for a critic, a genuine critic, to just go, guys, look, I think what you're saying here is really good, but this one little thing is, it's wrong, or whatever. They could turn the whole conversation around like that, and that's why some of the best things that I've ever learned have been from people criticizing me, and they're saying, "Hey, Nick, you're wrong here." I'm like, yeah, and agreeing with them and going, perhaps I am wrong, and going through it. So this is one of the things. James White's not like that. He's written his book, and if you come against his book, you're coming against truth and logic, and you're a cultist and all the rest of it, which is, I guess, in a way, a really good example of what not to do. The Bible talks about being teachable. It talks about Diotrephes and Demetrius. One is just throwing people out of the church, and he's the leader and he's the guru and all the rest of it. Where the other one is very teachable, and that's one of the things is meeting people who say they're leaders and pastors and all the rest of it. And when you get around them, they are just talking like, I'm the boss and I know everything. And it's just like, my understanding now is that a leader, pastor, is actually a servant. So I'm like, well, okay, where's your bowl? You're supposed to be washing my feet. You're saying you're a servant. You're a minister. You minister to me, please. Where's, you're going to make me a meal? It's sort of like that. I have that type of attitude when I meet these people. I'm like, well, actually, the church is, we're all equal. But when it comes to servanthood, Jesus taught, he's washing the disciples' feet, saying, look, I'm sort of like the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and, I can command angels and they'll do everything for me. But I've come to serve you guys, to teach you that you're not to be the boss over everyone. In the world, they'll lord it over you, but don't be like a CEO. Serve people, go under people, help them. Ignite fires underneath them, not just lump coals on them and I'm the boss, and pretty much what we see in the whole entire Christian movement. It's not a pyramid where you got the guru up top and these other elders and all this. It's an upside down pyramid. You got the servant at the bottom, the pastor, the leader, the elder, whatever you want to call it, and then it's like there to serve all these people. Jesus said, "The greatest among you will be servant of all." And so this type of thing of James White is just very common. He's at the top. He's the guru. And unfortunately, that's usually what gets taught. So people think that that's leadership. I'm being a leader. I boss people around. No, being a leader is being teachable, being open to correction. And so this is one of the things. I'm open to correction from someone who's just a new Christian and telling me something, and so, yeah, I guess my attitude's bad. Sometimes it takes that. You're walking along with someone and you say something and they're a new Christian and they're very sensitive to certain things. They're like, but Jesus said to love your enemies. And you're like, yeah, actually, I shouldn't be so cynical. Or, sometimes people can do that. And it's just pride to think that you can never learn anything from anyone. And every time a leader is face to face with another Christian, it's like they're looking at Christ. That's how we've got to treat them. And so I understand people can say dumb things and bad advice and all the rest of it, but what I've found is most of these leaders are untouchable, unteachable, and unless it's coming from someone with a greater authority than theirs, they won't accept it, especially in groups like the Potter's House. It's like, man, you try to give the pastor a Bible study or something that goes against the grain of everything, and it's just like, this hasn't come from the top. The Pope hasn't approved this. Does this have papal infallibility? Does it? It's like, dude, I've just given you a basic Bible study. Can't you tell if it's true or not? Does it have to have the anointing oil that's flowing from Aaron's garments or something, or from his beard? It's like this whole concept of anointing in half of these Pentecostal charismatic churches is pretty whacked. So anyway, we'll let White continue.
Baptist writers of the 1689 were talking about. Okay, Trinity, how the church functions, good. Textual critical issues, not so good. It goes out saying that the very text of the Word of God is inherently a foundational question of both faith and practice. So here's where the categories start breaking down. Again, ahistorically. Calvin didn't do this. Nobody up until this time period did this. The early church didn't do this. Some people started moving this direction in trying to fight against Rome. But hey, I've seen people make a lot of mistakes in trying to fight against Rome. The standard explanation of Matthew 16, rock and pebble, doesn't work. It doesn't work. You still hear it all the time, but it doesn't work. Doesn't mean because it's been used in the past that means that Catholics are right because a bad argument was used against them. Doesn't follow that way. So once again, what you've got here is the attempt to transfer the legitimate recognition of the supremacy of Scripture in matters of faith, practice, morals, backwards into the determination of the text itself. Becomes a vicious circle, not the proper epistemological circle of ultimate authorities by any stretch of the imagination. This is how you examine manuscripts, how you deal with the fact that God has historically used one method of transmitting the text over time. And it wasn't by angelic messengers dropping down newly edited text every few hundred years.
Who believes that? I don't know anyone on this planet, except for Mormons, who believe that the Bible just came down to us from heaven. It floated down, angelic messages came and gave us. No one. It's just a total slander. The King James Bible has come to us through the Textus Receptus. The Textus Receptus came to us through the Byzantine tradition and through the Latin tradition, through the Syriac tradition, the traditional texts in many languages. So what's he talking about? It's just another straw man. And that's the thing. When you read his book, he just mentions Ruckman and Ripplinger, and he's just trying to put anyone who argues with him, they become a Ruckmanite, they become a Riplingerite, they just slot into that category. So it's a bit like, if I was arguing with you about certain topics, and every time you said something, I'll just say, you're a Jehovah's Witness. That's what he does. It gets pretty tiring, but it's like, it just more shows that he is not willing to engage in serious debate or topic on this issue, or debate or argumentation on this topic. He just wants the low-hanging fruit. He wants people to be all like Stephen Anderson and all like Gail Ripplinger and easily disproven, and people who are just crazies. And so he'd rather focus on all that than people who have sound, logical argumentation, go back to the sources, do their homework and all the rest of it. He doesn't want to hear from them. You're a cultist if you do that. And so if I was probably like Stephen Anderson, he'd probably give me a bit more time, because then he could just bypass all the arguments and just say, see, he's crazy. So, if I just did some crazy things, or just, said some wacky stuff and became a hate preacher or whatever, he'd probably give me a bit of time. But anyway, let's let James continue.
The Joseph Smith methodology does not work. We reject it. It needs to be rejected by everybody.
Who doesn't?
That's not how you do it.
Really?
And Erasmus didn't believe it.
We've been doing it that
and
way.
And Beza didn't believe in it. So anybody who takes their work and then imbues it with that perspective is doing so out of context with history.
The Joseph Smith
methodology. Therefore, upon what biblical grounds do you advocate the historical critical praxis of reasoned eclecticism? If one cannot present a coherent biblical argument, that is the very substance of not having an apologetic. Without an actual biblical argument, their very best arguments against the received text are irrelevant. Now, I want everybody to think this through. I want you to understand why that is an absolutely bogus argument. It is a violation of logic, history, Reformed epistemology, all the way down the road. There is no value to that argument at all. With all due respect, if that's the best you've got, it means you've got nothing. And that's why you can't get these guys to engage the text. You can't get them to do it. We're sitting over here going, okay, how about this text? Oh, no. You see, you've got to deal with these presuppositional issues over here, you see.
Well, that's not what I've been doing. He's like, Revelation 16:5. I'm like, okay, let's study that. Okay, here, James, here's my conclusion. And see, the thing is, he likes to lump us all in together as TR people and King James people and traditionalists and all this. But then when it comes to this issue, he's like, well, this guy doesn't believe what these other guys believe, and the other guys, it's because we're all doing our different studies and we're all coming up with conclusions that sometimes are a little bit ahead, or sometimes I'm a little bit behind, some other people. And Robert Truelove's more, he's talking about canon and text and all that stuff, and something I'm not really that familiar with. But he's, Jeff Riddle, he's doing stuff. So, of course, we're all looking at each other's arguments and going, yeah, well, that's good and that's sound or whatever. Some people think that the way that I'm doing it is a naturalistic way of looking at it, looking at all the manuscripts and all that sort of stuff. And I disagree with that. But it's like, James White, one minute he's throwing us all in the same category, and next minute he's spreading us all around saying, there's no one who's in agreement here, and there's all different things. And it's like when he talked about the Revelation 16:5, he said, where else in the Bible are they, is it nomina sacra, and it's holy written on it, which is sacred, and it's a nominative noun phrase, and it's like, well, James, it's a rare place, and the book of Revelation is a rare book, so it's not like you're going to just find this everywhere. There's only 4 manuscripts that are before the 10th century, so obviously you're going to deal with that differently than you do with other manuscripts. If you've got a whole pile of manuscripts, you're dealing with a whole bunch of different information. Revelation, you're not dealing with a pile of manuscripts, you're dealing with about 350 documents, 4 of them before the 10th century, and so obviously you're dealing with something different. But he's like, oh, that's inconsistent. That's like, no, you're dealing with every scripture is different, every word is different, sometimes it's homoitheton, sometimes there's parablepsis, sometimes there's manuscript weight and evidence, and sometimes it's nomina sacra, and these are just issues that are different. He's like, oh, they're inconsistent. No, there's just more. It's not like, James has got his hammer, but everything's a nail. You just got to treat it like a nail. It's like, no one does that. Why are you even saying that? It's just, anyway, he's nearly finished here, and then I'll get on to other things.
Well, how about where the Textus Receptus came from? This quote-unquote received text, which you capitalize. Where did it come from? It came from the application of textual criticism. No, not gonna deal with that. Not gonna deal with that word.
Came from the application of textual criticism. Yeah, but not your type of textual criticism. It came from genuine textual criticism. It came from guys who knew their stuff. Having a Unitarian, George Van Smith, on the Westcott and Hort committee, that was a huge issue. A guy who doesn't believe Jesus is God, who wrote a book saying, that the Westcott and Hort Greek text is so good because they've taken out a lot of the issues that we used to have to deal with Trinitarians with. It's like, this is sort of like the main modern day foundational text. Carlo Martini, United Bible Society, Nestle Aland text, his influence there, Eugene Nida, Metzger, these liberals. It's like, these guys are doing things absolutely opposite to what the textual criticism done in the Reformation period. And so he doesn't seem to realise that. It's like I said before, it's like calling it all politics. Well, Chinese politics is the same as American politics. So, the way that they founded their country is exactly the same. It's called politics, So there's differences.
Just going to simply say that if Scripture is sufficient for faith and practice, therefore you need to be able to find the specific apostolic example of what? Reasoned eclecticism. Now, I'm not sure what Robert Truelove thinks reasoned eclecticism is specifically. But if it includes questions of scribes substituting terms because of parallel passages, scribes mistaking words that sounded like other words or looked like other words, issues such as ditography, repetition, homoitheton, the deletion of material due to similar endings in the line or lines of a Greek text. If you are referring to all that which is part and parcel of reason eclecticism, Erasmus did it all. And your text is based upon the same application. Just
James White is lying here. There are a whole bunch of rules that modern textual critics use, like the shorter reading is the better reading. So yeah, at times they'll go through it, they'll have a whole bunch of variants, and it's like, well, this is the shortest reading, it must be the better one, because they think that Orthodox people who are, Orthodox Christian, I'm not talking about Orthodox with a capital O, just Orthodox normal Christians, they wanted to make Jesus look more godly and everything, so they would write the Lord Jesus Christ instead of just Christ or Jesus or and so they were adding constantly to the text, so the shorter reading is the best. But in Revelation 14:1, it's a longer reading. Why has it changed? Just because. It's like, when you look at that, they say the harder reading is the best. So you've got some readings that just say some pretty dumb things, but it's harder. It's like, say, like the only begotten God, John chapter 1 verse 18. It's a harder reading because, you look at all, usually only begotten Son, only begotten Son, and only begotten God. It's like, and they've actually got other rules that would say they should say only begotten Son, but they go with only begotten God. It's a harder reading. But then sometimes there's harder readings that they don't go with. Why? So it's like it's the hardest reading until it's not, and then it's like it's the shortest reading until it's not, and so they have all these other restrictions that they put upon themselves, but then they deviate from these as well, and so it's all over the place. And so to say that this is exactly what Erasmus is doing, it's just an absolute lie. Like I said, it's just like saying Chinese and American, they're doing politics. He's put this blanket term, textual criticism, upon everything. Anything to do with the Bible is textual criticism. It's all the same. It's absolutely not.
just based upon a really small number of manuscripts, which results in a different text, but same principles. So, logically, if the text you're holding to was derived through the use of the things you're now saying we need to abandon, you are reasoning in a circle and cutting off your own foundation, aren't you? There's nothing rational about that. It's indefensible. And hence, that's why I say Reformed men should not hold to utterly indefensible positions. That's why this cannot go out of the little square box out in the world, because you try this with a Bart Ehrman and you're going to...
You try it with the Bart Ehrman and what he'll disagree with you. Bart Ehrman believes pretty much the same as James White. Believes it's pretty much the same as Dan Wallace, except he just says, I'm an agnostic. And I understand he's taken it further. He says, there were different Christianities, the Trinity was made up and all this other stuff. But ultimately, when it comes to bibliology, textual criticism, they pretty much believe it's the same thing in a sense where they come from the same school. I've listened to Bart Ehrman say some things, and then I've turned over to James White, and he said exactly the same thing, but just at the end sort of said, well, you're better off hearing it from me because I'm a Christian. But if you hear it from Bart Ehrman, he's not a Christian, so he's going to lead you astray. It's like, but you're saying the same thing. It's a bit like, you have to have a little bit of Satanism, or else you'll never appeal to those Satanists. You got to sort of believe a little bit of what they believe, because or else you'll never appeal to them. Or you got to understand, agree with the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a foot in the door, and then they won't attack you so much as being different. It's like, look, Bart Ehrman, Bruce Metzger, the Alens, most of the Bible societies, most of these guys are absolutely heretical. Metzger's just like, God made a mistake in the Bible. Or Matthew was just, he's going along writing a genealogy, and he made a mistake. we know that God says that he inspires every word. He obviously didn't there. He made a mistake. And so Matthew made a mistake. Luke made a mistake. These guys didn't make a perfect Bible in the beginning even. That's what these guys believe. And so you don't find James White coming out and saying all that stuff, because he doesn't bite the hand that feeds him. He gets money to print books like this. This is his bestseller. So of course he's going to be upset when you start, touching the anointed thing. He's very upset about that. Anyway, we'll let him continue. I didn't think it was going to go this long, but he's nearly done.
Get torn to shreds, and rightfully so. Because you're being inconsistent. You're being inconsistent. So if you're asking for and see how, do you see how this was done? First, you take what the authors of the Confessions would have considered to be faith and practice. You illegitimately transfer that to, that means the transcription error of Revelation 14:1. Or as we're going to see here in a little while, the homoteleuton error at 1 John 3:1. These are matters of faith and practice. Then you can't answer the question yourself. That's the first thing. You cannot derive a text if you do not accept the necessity of the examination of manuscripts, the examination of scribal habits, i.e., critical examination, textual criticism. If you say that you have to have that laid out in the Bible, where the Apostle Paul sent an epistle to Timothy that laid out difficult endings and difficult readings and shorter readings and all the canons of textual critical study, if you say you need to have that so as to engage in textual criticism of the Bible, A, it does not exist, B, it did not exist for Erasmus, C, therefore your text is to be rejected by your own principles. And in fact, there is no text of the Bible any longer at all, because no one has a text. No one is using a text based on one manuscript, because you would have to identify some manuscript, and there is no manuscript in the world that reads identical to TR. Not a one, never has been.
Notice he says that in other times when he's trying to be palatable, he says there's, he holds up the TR and he's like, there's no manuscript in the world that agrees with the TR. But then he turns around, he'll turn and say, yeah, and neither with, the critical text either. So he's just, but like I said, when he mentioned that, I said, he usually only just says text receptus. It's one of his favourite things that he keeps bringing up. There's no manuscript in the world that reads just like the TR. Well, of course, even in most manuscripts, the name of Jesus was in nomen sacra. So it would say the name of Jesus in Greek is Yesu, as I might have an iota and a upsilon, and with a line above it. And it's like, of course, we're not going to do that. And so most of these things, and they might have a few variation of words, spelling, and things like that, or a final new, and there's going to be differences in manuscripts. Everyone agrees there's differences, and so he's absolutely confusing himself. And anyway, we'll let him just continue, but
never will be. You have an eclectic text, whether you want to recognize that or not.
We agree.
But it's like the Byzantine. It's not the same thing. And there is
no one is saying. See, this is the thing. James White says, you Textus Receptus guys believe in the majority text argument. And no, we don't. He's like, you guys, you don't just count all the Byzantine texts and run with it, because that's a majority text argument. You guys had to do a reasoned eclecticism. So, yeah, we agree. But our text isn't just the Byzantine text. It's not just the majority text. We go through all the received texts: the Latin, the Syriac, the Arabic, the Ethiopic, the Greek, and much of the Greek is rejected, like Vaticanus and modern day Sinaiticus, and we go through all the traditional texts and look at them all and conclude what the original Greek was saying. We don't just count Greek heads and go, okay, we've got these Greek manuscripts. let's just count Greek heads. Okay, that this many agree, this don't, and that's the majority text position. We're not majority text guys. And so, he argues as if we are, and then he turns around and says that we're not. And so he has this straw man that we follow majority text position. We don't. It's just dumb. It just so happens that most of what we believe and think and what we think is in the scriptures agrees with the majority text, with the majority of readings. It just so happens to be the case. But there's a whole science of textual criticism called the majority text, and we don't agree with it. We don't go with it. And so if we did, we'd be majority text guys, not TR guys and King James guys. It's just a straw man.
No question in the world that Erasmus would have read this and gone, "You've got to be kidding me." No. You can't do that. Erasmus would never have accepted this type of argumentation at all.
Yeah, not the one that he's describing, where we just, things floating down from heaven, James? What are you talking about? And the thing is, he always says, the King James translators, if they were here today, they would laugh at what you believe, and they would agree with me and all this. I absolutely think that you're just putting those thoughts into their mind. You're putting words in their mouth. You're lying and saying the same with Erasmus, saying that Erasmus would just turn around and say, you King James guys, I'm laughing my head off at you because you actually took me seriously here, and we got all this other information that you could go with, and what you go with my stupid information is redundant now. We've got computers, and we got the computer-based genealogical method. We can go with that now, and it's like Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, King James guys, they would be on my side. They wouldn't be on his side. James White doesn't have a Bible until 2030. He's admitted that. He said, when the CBGM comes out with their text, it'll be 2030. And it's like, where's the Bible until then? Is it just floating in space? And what's the best one? And, anyway.
And so there was a response from Matthew Eklund. Wouldn't critical text advocates be able to say that among all the different viable and meaningful variants, far less than 1% of all textual variants, choosing one over another in any location does nothing to change any Christian doctrine or practice? Does having an absolutely fixed text really change this? I was watching some videos of Dr. Dan Wallace earlier where he affirmed this, Bruce Metzger affirmed this, and even Bart Ehrman affirmed this in the appendix of his Misquoting Jesus book. When I heard that quote, I actually thought to post that observation here to get everyone's responses to that claim. Are they not correct? Robert Truellove's response is not a biblical argument. Okay, so Robert Truelove, we need the biblical argument from you that substantiates the mechanism whereby the Textus Receptus was derived. So you need to give us specific references to the Latin Vulgate, to the supremacy of the Latin over the Greek, at the places where the Latin takes precedence over the Greek in the production of the Textus Receptus and in the readings that ended up in the final Textus Receptus. You've got to have the exact references in biblical texts for Erasmus's recognition of homoiteleuton, titography. If you're demanding it of us, you got to do it yourself. So you show us in the Bible the textual critical principles that gave rise to TR, and then you've got an argument. You can't. You know it. That's why that debate didn't take place. So.
Okay, so maybe Robert Truelove doesn't want to do that or can't do that or whatever. I think he probably could, but Jeff Riddle probably could. But at the end of the day, the argument that he's got there is, we have to sort of prove where the TR came from, or else we haven't got a text, and all this stuff. But that's what I'm showing to James White. I'm like, okay, James, you're saying that he only had one manuscript, but actually these 20 things that you're saying are errors in the book of Revelation aren't errors because he didn't go to the Latin in these issues. He had other Greek manuscripts. He clearly says that in his own annotations. He doesn't want to hear it. And so 1 minute, basically he's scolding me and calling me a cultist for doing what he's demanding Robert Truelove do. Now, I know me and Robert Truelove, we have different opinions and, different ways of going through stuff. And I know some people say from the confessional bibliology standpoint that, some of the things that I'm doing is naturalistic, by looking at all the manuscripts and weighing evidence and all that sort of stuff. But, and that's fine. We've all got different opinions on things and all the rest of it. But he's scolding Robert Truelove for not doing what I'm doing. But when I do it, he's blocking me. It's just so ridiculous. But at the end of the day, he has a presupposition that Erasmus used this Latin text. He's like, so you have to show us where the Latin is. And so the thing is, James White, with the whole Revelation 16:5 issue, I showed James that basically, the Greek text can say one thing, but if it's nomina sacra, that overrides what the Greek text is saying. And it has done in many cases. Some things are nomina sacra, we know what it says, and we're all in agreement. And so I've said things to James White that, okay, he's like, oh, well, the Greek text this, the Greek text that. I'm like, yeah, but the Textus Receptus position looks at the Greek, looks at the Latin, looks at the early church writers, and concludes things. And so James White's like, okay, he's gone on to the Book of Revelation and said, okay, Erasmus is back translating from the Latin then. So you're saying we're using the Latin, you're back translating from Latin. So no, he actually didn't back translate from Latin. There was one bit of homotheaton in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, where he did that, but that's just one case where he saw it was homotheaton, he's corrected that, but it doesn't mean the rest of the book is like that, or any deviation from Reuchling's. And he's saying we've only got one manuscript, and something. No, he had lots of manuscripts, and so he's creating a false argument about the whole Latin Greek thing, because this is one of the key issues about understanding textual criticism and the Textus Receptus is Erasmus was fluent in Latin, he was fluent in Greek, and he was totally saturated with the early church writers, quotations of the Bible, and on a whole bunch of other issues. So he was well educated in these three things. And so this came out in his Latin text, came out in his Greek text. And see, the thing is, the first primary position would be that we look at the Greek text as primary, okay? So when Erasmus was doing his Latin text, he got the Greek, and he is correcting his Latin from the Greek, okay? So then, that's the first case. The second case is you get the Greek, and you don't just go, okay, that's it. No, you look at the Latin, you look at early church writers, and you can correct mildly the Greek from those sources. And so, because we have those sources, we can look at the Greek from that perspective. And so, we have the early church writings, and we can look at the Latin and the Greek from the early church writings. And so then, as time progressed, we looked at the Syriac, the Syriac, the Arabic, Ethiopic, many other languages were used in the same way. It's not like, okay, we just went to the Ethiopic on that, or we just went to the Arabic. No, it's like looking at the Arabic and their traditional text and what they have there, or say the Syriac, which is what Beza would use. He would see certain readings and say, wow, that's clearly attested in this old Syriac manuscript, and this other one, and this other one. And he would be able to see where there's errors in the Syriac from using his Greek, using his Latin, using other things. And so that's what they were doing. They were going through and cleaning up each other. And so after the age of manuscripts, it was the age of printing. And so they were doing this. They cleaned it all up. And then in the King James Bible, it's like the capstone on it, where years and years later, they're all sitting around, it's like, I don't like this Bible anymore, and it's like, we've got all these other manuscripts that say other things, and let's just highlight these other ones that have been rejected for many years, and they're just going with these rejected manuscripts, because, anyone who's worked in a kitchen, you're cutting away at stuff, and there's some stuff that's fat. You just throw that in the bin. It's like, that's rotten. That's a rotten tomato. You don't cook with that. You throw it in the bin. So these guys are getting all the rejected stuff and tipping it back on the table and saying, these are the best now. And the other stuff that you had and you were using is just bad. That's actually rotten. And you just left there going, man, these texts were rejected by, not only by scholars, but by the church. The church, you don't find like Sinaiticus, even in the Greek monastery, you don't find them all crowded around it and going, "Wow, this is the Bible. This is awesome. You don't find them doing that. You don't find it, Codex Vaticanus, like everyone just like, man, I've got to get a copy of that. I've got to write it down. That's the true text. No, but you do with the TR. You find people, dying to translate this. And so these signs will follow those who believe. They'll be martyrdom. So anyway, I am going to switch James White off, which is a great feeling. And I'm just going to chat a little bit about this issue of Jan Kranz. So James White on his program a few weeks ago, he said, or a week ago, he said, he quoted Jan Kranz. Now, I've gone through and compared Jan Kranz with Erica Rummel. Now, Erica Rummel, very interesting person. Now, when I jumped on their thingy, their Amazon account, I realised that, wow, Erica Rummel had written books on Erasmus, had written books on the Complutensian guys, written a whole bunch of stuff about the Renaissance, and is a true bona fide scholar. She's done one on Cisneros, and so that's one of the main guys from the Complutensian. She's written a book called The Erasmus Reader. She's written a book called The Confessionalization of Humanism in Reformed Germany. Another one on Desiderius Erasmus. The Case Against Johann Reuchlin. That's the Reuchlin Papyri that we're talking about. This lady has written a whole bunch of books. She's a bona fide scholar. Okay, so now she has written some things, and she's written Erasmus's annotations on the New Testament as well. Erasmus is a translator of the classics. She's written heaps of stuff. Erasmus and his Catholic critics. Erasmus on women. Erasmus on outstanding Christian thinkers. This person was just writing tons of stuff. Okay, so you got Jan Kranz, critical text guy, pretty smart guy, but he's saying a whole bunch of stuff which we've been looking at as it's untrue. The Reuchlin's Papyrus was one thing that Erasmus looked at, but he had many manuscripts that he looked at. And so when we look at the Latin translation of Jan Kranz and we compare it with Erica Rummel, there's huge differences. Now, have a listen to this. So James White said that Erasmus had a low view of Revelation, and it was deuterocanonical in his eyes. It means it's like the Apocrypha. Listen to what Jan Kranz says, and you sort of get this idea. So this is exactly what James White read. He said, "The style of this book is very simple, and its contents are mostly narrative, let alone the fact that its author has long since been unknown." So it's almost like Erasmus is saying that. We don't know who wrote Revelation. So this is what James White on his show is saying. See, Erasmus is, he has a low view of Revelation. Why, you Texas Receptus guys, you got a low view of Revelation. This Catholic guy, and remember he got real mad and he was like, going off his head because he read this. Let me read to you the exact same part, but translated many years ago by Erica Rummel, who doesn't have this bias. It says, "The language of this book is very simple, and the content has mostly a historical sense. Not to mention, the authorship was once uncertain." So Kranz said the author has long since been unknown, where she said the authorship was once uncertain. So what Erasmus was saying was the Greeks, they didn't really respect the book of Revelation like the Latins did and many other cultures did. And that's why, he's saying there's certain errors in the Greek and things like that. And so Jan Kranz is saying that Erasmus is going, the authorship's unknown. That's what Erasmus is saying. We didn't even know who wrote this book. It's probably not even John. Where he wasn't saying that. He was saying the Greeks have basically said the authorship was once uncertain. And that's not his point of view, he's just saying a historical fact. So isn't it amazing? Here's James White losing it over that. And it's like, you just have to go to a different translation of that, and you can see that he's being duped by Jan Kranz. And it's quite interesting. I'm going through a bit of Jan Kranz stuff at the moment, finding holes everywhere. And so I guess in a way it'd be good to actually move away from James White, because he's just full of emotionalism and just saying, yeah, he just says whatever comes to his mind. But someone like Jan Kranz, he's a little bit more systematic, and I'm going to be going through his article on Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, and showing the mistakes in that. So what I'll quickly do, actually, there's one more thing on that Kranz issue. Okay, so this is Kranz's failure to connect the dots, okay? So in chapter 2, on page 32 of Jan Kranz's book, Beyond What Is Written, so this is on my website. You can read this. If you go to my website, tr.org.au, and just type in Revelation 22:19 into the search bar, and this page will come up. So in chapter 2 on page 32 in Jan Kranz's book, Beyond What Is Written, he shows more error that is parroted by James White. In the conclusion, in the context of homoioteiton, so this is in the context of what Jan Kranz is saying about homoioteiton. He says another clear description of the process can be found in Erasmus's reaction to one of Lee's criticisms. So Lee was a critic of Erasmus. So this is what Erasmus said to Lee. He said, "I felt the scribe had made an error for the following reason. Because the words in this book occur twice, he turned his eyes to the second instance, omitting the words in between. There is no stone on which the copyists stumble more often." So basically this is Erasmus saying he's reading through the Greek, and where it says, your name will be taken from this book, and from the book of life. So the word book appears twice there, and he believes that what happened was homoioteiton, which is similar endings, and they've actually skipped a line, or it's parablepsis, where you're sometimes you're reading a book and you get a bit distracted and you go back and you read, you've actually skipped a line and you have to find out where you are. And so when you're doing copying, it's quite a common thing. So basically he's saying he's reading through this Greek manuscript, and at that point, homoioteiton, that's what happened there. And so it's a common thing. Okay, so everyone can understand that. But doesn't that say to us that he wasn't using the Reuchlins papyri, which don't have the last 6 verses? This is talking about verse 19, which is part of that. And so he's doing the book of Revelation, and he's saying that, he showed that it was homoioteiton, similar endings. So doesn't that show us that it's not just the Reuchlins papyri? Even in just that comment, there's all these comments all the way through that point to him having more than one manuscript, and this is the sort of thing James White will have a fit over. But then we notice Jan Kranz, he has a footnote here, he's got a whole bunch of Latin, and he says this description is nice and clearly based on acquaintance with scribal practice, so it's homoioteiton. He says, listen to this, but Erasmus is mistaken about the text critical case he's describing. It says, in minuscule 2841, which is the Reuchlins, I might be saying Reuchlins papyri, I'm sorry about that. There is a Reuchlins papyri, I should be saying Reuchlins codex. If I have been saying that, I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't say that, but I'm just double checking. In minuscule 2841, which is a Reuchlins codex of Revelation, the manuscript he used for Revelation in his first edition, the final verses of the book are not missing because of homoioteiton, but simply because a leaf of the manuscript is missing. Actually, as is often stated, it is not the final leaf of the manuscript that is missing, but the leaf with, besides part of the commentary, the final verses of the text, to wit, Revelation 22, verses 16 and 21. The words from Ho-Aster, or the star, I guess it's bright morning star or something, at the end of verse 16 onwards. It has to be granted, however, that minuscule 2814, or its volage, certainly suffered from homoiouton at many places. One might conclude that homoiouton, this phenomena were familiar to Erasmus to such an extent that he could even use them as subterfuge when he no longer remembered the exact state of affairs. So what he's saying is, Lee's like, what about this ending of Revelation? Erasmus is like, well, what I went through the Greek manuscript, saw it was homoiouton, and that's my conclusion there. That's why I have that reading. So Jan Kranz is saying, no, he only had one manuscript, and the last 6 verses are missing. So Erasmus is a bit dumb. He's got like dementia or something, and these homoiouton issues were so familiar to him. It says to such an extent that he could even use them as subterfuge where he no longer remembered the exact state of affairs. He's just making it up, like, at the last verse, instead of recognizing that Erasmus used different Greek text, he's actually just sticking with the one text, one Greek narrative, because the one Greek text narrative, that just opens up all these cans of worms to back translation of Latin and all this sort of stuff, and just, we've got one text for Revelation and he's just translating backwards from Latin into Greek into the text and all this bizarre stuff. So notice that Erasmus clearly said it was homoiouton, but Kranz is following the areas of Delitz and not recognizing the 2 separate issues. Okay, so there's 2 issues here. One related to the Greek manuscript containing homoiouton in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. Erasmus clearly said he looked at the Greek, he amended that Greek according to what to his textual critical principles. And the other involves this manuscript that he went away from home to inspect, that the last page has fallen off, and he's like, the last page has fallen off. And so he just filled in from the Latin there and then sent it back and said, this is another manuscript that I've examined. And so you can see, these stories, they don't gel, they don't mix. They're separate stories where these guys have to say, it's the same story. And by mixing these events and claiming Erasmus had only one manuscript for Revelation, this opens up all type of speculation and erroneous conclusions. So I hope you see how important this is, because it's like if we were dealing with the last 12 verses of Mark or the woman caught in adultery. It's 12 verses. So these guys basically placing doubt on 6 verses of the book of Revelation and saying they only have one manuscript and all this, and there's so many lies and and I'm going to prove in this book that I'm writing that this comes from Bengal, who actually falsely predicted the date that Jesus would return. So these guys are getting their information from occultists. So me quoting Erasmus, which I'm actually going to go to this quote, because where are we? I'm going to go to this quote because this shows that, I've gone to Erasmus, I've seen what he said, and let's look at what he says in the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 6. So James White claims Erasmus used only one manuscript for Revelation. Jan Kranz says that, and basically they're saying all the scholars agree, because they just parrot each other over the years, So Erasmus said in Revelation 1:6, he said, "Sic enim est in gratias in exemplaris." So I probably said all that wrong in Latin, but basically it translates as it is in the Greek copies, plural. So he's talking about a certain reading, and he's saying it is in the Greek copies. Where did I get this information from? From Scrivener. Scrivener said that he used more than one copy. He used the Greek, other Greek manuscripts than Roykin's. So Erasmus also examined Laurentinius Codex in Revelation 8:13, which was Laurentinus Vallis manuscript with annotation. So Lorenzo Valla, he had pretty much done a very similar thing to Erasmus with writing a whole bunch of annotations on the New Testament and came to different conclusions. Now, I've read Lorenzo Valla in Revelation 16:5. But so basically he had all that information as well. So what was Lorenzo Valla looking at? He was looking at Greek manuscripts. So that's the thing, that they're not admitting that he was, he just went to the Latin, that's it, because it disagrees. No, he was looking at Lorenzo Valla. He was looking at Greek copies in the plural. And these are pointed out by Scrivener. That, and Scrivener's no friend of Erasmus. To me, Scrivener is like, he was on the Westcott and Hort Translation Committee. Yes, he did the printed edition of the Text Receptus, but it's sort of like, it's just a scholarly endeavour for him. I think he was just it's a bit like Samson, whose side is he on? One minute he's good, next minute he's bad. It's he's all over the place. Is he a sinner or a saint? Is he in heaven or hell? And so I don't have to agree with these guys. I did a whole thing and Dean John William Berg on The Good, the Bad and the Ugly recently, and just saying what I thought. But this just clearly shows us that they're not saying the full story. They're not saying these issues. And I've only just had a cursory look through it. So I'm going to be going through and examining all the annotations of Erasmus in Revelation. And we'll be looking at these. We'll be looking at the annotations of Beza. Now, I've read tons of annotations of Beza. If you want to go to my website, you can see all the copy and paste that I've done there. So anyway, now this is the last thing we're going to do. Now, I know I've been going for like about 3 hours, but I just want to get this this done. And that's why I started early, because usually I continue on to like 12 o'clock but that's still only about 3 hours, where I knew I was going to have a long time today. So I'm going to be reading an article which is by James Snap Jr., which was done on Monday, February the 18th, so just recently, 2019, and it's called Erasmus's Manuscript of Revelation. So I'm going to show you that James Snap Jr. is wrong here too. But he has some interesting things to say, but with what I've just shown you, it's just a cursory look. These guys are just parroting. It's called scholasticism. It's a problem where they just quote another scholar, and rather than go behind that scholar and find out what really happened. So there might be some things that I skip through here, because James Snap tends to get bogged down in very in detail, and not saying that's wrong. It's just hard to communicate that. Now, James Snap Jr. is not on my side. He's not on James White's side. He has a completely different position, which I would equate to more of a majority text type of position. Erasmus's first edition of the printed Greek New Testament was released by printer John Froben in 1516. It has several famous features. One of them involves the way Erasmus treated the last 6 verses of Revelation. Erasmus had only one Greek manuscript of Revelation when he compiled the text for his Novum Instrumentum, the official name of the first edition. So that was GA 2814, which had been loaned to Erasmus by Johann Reuchlin. For a long time, this manuscript was simply referred to as Manuscript 1R. So that's good information, but he's saying that's all, he only had access to one manuscript, and that's not true. It's just, as I just read, Book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 6, Erasmus's annotation said he had Greek copies, plural. Page views of the entire manuscript can now be accessed at the website of the Library of the University of Augsburg. You may need to reload the page once or twice to get the page views. Okay, and then he's got in commas a part of a page there of that, of the Reuchlin manuscript, which is quite interesting. But I won't go through that because it's sort of diverting from what we're looking at. Okay, so it says, if you consult the final pages of this manuscript, you can see that at the foot of folio 92V, most of the text of Revelation 22:16 appears interrupted by and followed by Andreas's commentary on the next page, 93R. We find ourselves in the summary of the contents of Revelation with Andreas, in which Andreas ended his commentary. On 93V, or the verso, so you got verso and recto. Oops, that's the light on. On 93V, Andreas' review of the contents of Revelation continues. And then on 94R, in entirely different handwriting, as if someone had noticed that the manuscript had been damaged and made this replacement page, although the entire loss was not detected, we find that the last words of Andreas' commentary, there are a few more pages, but they are blank. It looks like 95V may have been prepared to hold a framed illustration, which was never added. Okay, so it's just some technical details about the Reuchlin Papyrus. So it says, this fits in with the description that was supplied by Erasmus regarding the manuscript that he used as the main basis for his compilation of the text of Revelation. Erasmus mentioned that he used a Greek manuscript that was deficient in the end, and the course of correspondence with Lee, in the course of correspondence he wrote, and then it's all written in Latin, but it says, that is in English, at the end of my exemplar in Revelation, of which I only have one, because Greek copies of this book are rare, a few lines were missing. I added them using Latin copies as the basis. These lines were the sort that could be reconstructed in Greek by consulting the preceding text. So this is what Erasmus is saying. He went to look at this Reuchlin Papyri, found the same, exactly as he mentioned, that the last page is missing, and that's exactly how they have it today in the museum. And he said, so the last 6 verses are missing, so I just filled them in from the Latin. And then he goes on to say that he sent this to his guys in Basel, and he said, look, the correct readings are with the guys in Aldus, the Aldine guys. They're working on the text as well. Go and get the reading from them, or write to them, or whatever, and they'll send you the correct reading, and that'll be good. But this is just another manuscript that he's looking at, okay? So what they're doing is they try to confuse these two things, because, and they always try to say that Erasmus is lying about this, okay? So it gets pretty full on in here. Okay, so this accounts, this is back to Snap, this accounts for the very unusual Greek text in Revelation chapter 22, verses 16b to 21 in Erasmus's compilation. For these verses, Erasmus took a hand copy of the Vulgate and translated its Latin text, Revelation 22, 16b to 21, into Greek, beginning with ho aster. Erasmus's reconstruction of this passage, however, does not match up with any Greek manuscripts at several points, at least not with any Greek manuscripts made prior to his compilation. Although the Textus Receptus went through several revisions in the 1500s, Erasmus's retro translation of Revelation 22, 16b to 21 survived the process. As a result, the Textus Receptus continues to perpetuate some Greek readings in this passage that originated with Erasmus. Bruce Metzger, in a footnote on page 100 of the text of the New Testament, 3rd edition, wrote about some of them. So this is Bruce Metzger. So this is the thing. Here's James Snap. He said exactly the same thing as James White. And now he's quoting Bruce Metzger. You know, Bruce Metzger is just renowned for just slandering Erasmus and saying all sorts of bizarre things that have been disproven. And but here he is, just, you know, this is true. For example, akathartetos, Revelation chapter, sorry, it's in Roman numerals 17:4. There is, however, no such word in the Greek language. A kathartes, meaning uncleanness. Okay, so he's got these examples. They're in Greek. There's Roman numerals there, so it's going to be very difficult to read through them. But basically, this is just a list of things where it's like, okay, these are rare readings of Erasmus, and there's no Greek to back this up, and because they're just saying it's Reuchlins and that's it. But when you go through some of these, like I've gone through Revelation 17:8 and found the Greek word that James White was saying wasn't a word, is a word, and is used, and is in manuscripts. It's just, you just got to check everything these guys say, because it's just so loose. It's so it's all over the place. These guys are not, that they're not used to being held to a high standard of like, man, you got one thing wrong here. You got to be really careful. That they just say things and just they'll just read some other scholar and just run with it. Oh yeah, that's what he said, and he's a professional, so it's scholasticism. So, as I said, I'll probably skip through a little bit of this, but so James Snapp says, how significant are these variations? Most of them are trivial. If one takes the KJV and the NASB and compares the two, it appears that most of the new readings invented by Erasmus made no difference in translation. So verse 18, King James Version has 4, and NASB does not have that. Verse 19, we have Book of Life, Tree of Life. Now, Erasmus clearly said it was homoiouton, so it's nothing to do with Greek manuscripts. It's to do with the issue of parablepsis. And so, verse 19, King James says, and from the things which are written, the NASB has which are written. So that is, in the King James Version, 3 things are referred to: the Book of Life, the Holy City, and the things that are written in this book. Whereas the New American Standard Bible, 2 things are referenced to: the Book of Life and the Holy City, which are written about in this book. So it's 2 things that are written in the book, and where 3 things in the King James are Book of Life, Holy City, and the things that are written in this book. Verse 20, even so come. NASB does not have even so. 21, King James Version has our Lord Jesus Christ. NASB just has the Lord Jesus. King James Version says you all. NASB says all. So the only difference between Tree of Life and Book of Life yields a significant change to the meaning of the text. Metzger, in his textual commentary on the Greek New Testament, albeit not in all editions, proposed a theory to account for this. The corruption of tree into book had occurred earlier in the transmission of the Latin text, when a scribe accidentally miscopied the correct word lingo as libro, book. If Metzger's theory is true, the confusion between lingo and libro may have occurred much early enough to affect some early Latin texts and the Bohairic version, because it's actually in early Bohairic manuscripts, book, the reading book, which is the King James reading. All Greek manuscripts of Revelation, however, at least all Greek manuscripts prior to Erasmus, printed text, support the reading Tree of Life. That's why we are not majority text guys just counting this. We practice textual criticism, and Erasmus said it was homoiouton, clearly. Some more information about Erasmus's manuscript of Revelation may be helpful. For many years after Erasmus used it, its location was not publicly known, and there was some concern that it had been lost. In 1861, however, it turned up, and the scholar who discovered it, Franz Delitzsch, wrote a detailed essay in German describing its renderings and showing how tightly its contents matched up with Erasmus's compilation, leaving no doubt that it was indeed Codex Reuchlins, the manuscript used by Erasmus. It was later given the new identification number, Gregory Allen number 2814. So, accompanying the text of Revelation 2814, a commentary which was composed by Archbishop Andreas of Caesarea in 6:11. Contrary to the recent claim made by James White, so James Snapp and James White are loggerheads with each other, this commentary was not written in Latin. It is Greek. So that's why James Snapp is like, well, it's not the Latin that he's got a Greek commentary there. So that's why James Snapp is saying he just got the Latin Vulgate and wrote it. It's like, okay. Prior to Andreas of Caesarea, this Caesarea is the same place as Caesarea in Turkey, not the Caesarea of the coast of Israel. A writer named Oikoumenios had also written a commentary on Revelation in the late 500s. The work of Oikoumenios was known to Andreas, and he refers to it repeatedly. There's not a lot of data about the setting in which Oikoumenios wrote, but one of his statements indicates the time when he wrote. He stated specifically, more than 500 years have passed since John wrote the book of Revelation. The time between the comparison of Oikoumenios' commentary and the commentary by Andreas couldn't have been great. So Andreas's commentary became something of a standard work. Meanwhile, the Latin commentary on Revelation by the 4th century writer Tychonius similarly was widely used, despite Tychonius's Donatist views. It was often copied with the text of Revelation itself in a specialized format, which Metzger described in the text of the New Testament. So this is Metzger describing it. He divided the book into 24 logoi, or discourses, because 24 elders sitting on the thrones about the throne of God, Revelation chapter 4, verse 4. He further reflected that the nature of each of the 24 elders was tripartite, Soma, Suke, and Pneuma. So it's a soul, body, soul, and spirit, and therefore divided into Logos, into Kephalia, making a total of 72 chapters for the entire book. So the Kephalia is the chapters. So it's a little bit technical there, but an English translation of Andreas's commentary on Revelation with an insightful introduction was recently completed by Eugenia Constantinou. It can be downloaded for free, although you might have to spend a few minutes tracking it down from a large collection of academic papers. It is also available to purchase as a paper book. The Greek of Andreas commentary, extracted from volume 106 in Milne's Patrology Graece series, is also online. So it's a whole bunch of technical stuff. I probably could have skipped that, but this is the last thing he's got to say. Some writers who defend the Textus Receptus, such as Thomas Holland and Chris Thomas, have insisted that Erasmus did not reconstruct Revelation chapter 22, verse 16 and 21 from Latin, or at least there is little evidence for such a reconstruction. Jan Kranz has issued a detailed and remarkably effective reply, and his general conclusions are confirmed beyond all doubt by the examination of the online page views of 2814. And so basically James Snapp is just repeating James White's article, and I think because James White was talking about James Snapp and saying, oh, he's putting pictures up of me, sort of like memes and things. So I think what's happened is James White's read through this, and it's confirmed to him that, oh, this James Snapp guy believes this too. So he's got double confidence, So he's reading through Kranz, he's reading through Snapp, and so then I come along and say, no, actually Erasmus did have other Greek copies, and he's just lost it because it's something that he felt like he had confidence in. But he's basically said here that Kranz has written against Thomas Holland, but he likens Thomas Holland and Chris Thomas as just Textus Receptus guys. But the thing is, Thomas Holland is he's the one that Jan Kranz wrote the article on. He didn't write it against Chris Thomas. Chris Thomas runs the website called Confessional Bibliology, which he has a great article about Erasmus. He has a lot of stuff about the the anecdotes of Erasmus, the rush to print concept, that, he made the rash wager of, I'll put the Comma Johanneum in if anyone finds a manuscript and all this sort of stuff. And so he has a good article called Erasmerian Myths, Revelation back translated from the Vulgate, ? And he talks about how, this goes against all the principles of what Erasmus was doing, which was basically working on this Greek text, because he rejected Codex Vaticanus because he said that it was basically a Greek text from the Latin. So he wasn't interested in that. It's of curiosity, but it's like, I don't want that, So he said that was basically done in 1439, which is quite interesting. So, and it's quite interesting. It's only just appeared in the Vatican Library 10 years later. It's pretty amazing. But he's got a good article. It's quite just straight to the point. I think there is a little bit of detail that he could elaborate on, but I'm just going to quickly go through the first little bit of Jan Kranz's article. So I think that Thomas Holland was actually, his argumentation is flawed because he misread Hoskia, and he didn't do. A lot of the time his stuff is quite interesting and quite good, but on this issue he failed. And Jan Kranz, he says, look, I don't usually just go after a King James guy, but I just have to in this case because he's so wrong and all this stuff. But I'll just read to you what Kranz says in the beginning, okay? So, in his introduction, he says, the story of Erasmus's retranslation from the final verses of Revelation from the Vulgate into the Greek is well known and discussed in every textbook on New Testament textual criticism. The basic elements or facts are the following. The first edition of the New Testament with a Greek text was prepared by Erasmus and published in 1516. For Revelation, he based his Greek text on one single manuscript, minuscule 1R, so that's the Reuchlins, now numbered 2814, according to the Gregory Ayland number. This manuscript, however, lacks the final verses of the book, and in order to have a complete text, Erasmus retranslated these verses into Greek from the Latin. Elements of his retranslation survive in every edition of the so-called Textus Receptus, the standard text of the printed Greek text until the 19th century. So obviously, for those who try to defend the Textus Receptus as the original text of the Greek New Testament, this story poses something of a problem. So here is one text with, it's not loaded yet, the next page. So that's fine. Well, basically it just goes on to say that, this is the problem. So it's exactly the same argument as James White. Exactly the same argument as Snap. These guys are not looking at Erasmus. They're just repeating what has been said over the years. And a lot of the time, these guys, it's a bit like Simonides, if you've been following the Sinaiticus issue. Many times he's just demonized. Everything he says is just wrong, and it's demonic and all the rest of it. But you've got to give Erasmus the benefit of the doubt here, where unless he's actually proven wrong, and the thing is, like, what they're saying is, Jan Kranz, when there's evidence against this, he's basically saying Erasmus is lying because he knew so much about homoteuton. When he's put on the spot, he just said, it's homoteuton. No, he clearly said that was the case in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. But when he was inspecting the Reuchlins papyrus, the Reuchlins codex, he clearly, that was a distinctly different time. That was when he realized the last 6 verses were there. Everything else Erasmus said has been spot on, correct, proven historically accurate, but they still say he's a liar on everything else. Just because he's saying he used different Greek manuscripts, he must be lying because it doesn't fit our story. And so this is what I'm going to be writing on. So the next page is loaded up. It says, obviously, for those who try to defend the text of Receptus as the original text of the Greek New Testament, this story poses something of a problem. Here is one text in which the presumably uninterrupted line of transmission is demonstrably broken. Only a miracle could have made Erasmus produce exactly the same text as the original Greek, and such a miracle did not happen. So let me just describe how dumb this is. Basically, Erasmus, when he was put on the spot by Lee, said it was homoioteuton, and he clearly showed exactly where, and that would explain everything, that would explain the reading Book of Life, okay? Then, when we look at his quotations, he clearly says he went from Basel, went to look at this Reuchlin manuscript, and doesn't it basically say to you that he was writing everything down? He's copying the whole thing. He's going through, just writing it all down. And then in the end, he's like, oh man, there's something missing here. So he filled it in and he sent it to his guys in Basel saying, look, just fill in the rest from this other manuscript. So at least we've got a full volume of this, because the last page is missing, which is unfortunate. And so these guys mix these stories up and say, see, he only had one manuscript, and he's lying about this homoioteuton thing because, he's so familiar with it that, of course, he's Erasmus, he's going to lie. And it's like, this is the top-notch scholarship that James White's telling us to go to. And then they're basically saying that then the whole thing about this transmission of a Greek text to us today in the Text Receptus is just had to either be a miracle or, Erasmus just magically did it, and that's what we believe is the preserved text. So basically they're saying, the Text Receptus doesn't have this succession. It's just halfway through, it's like Erasmus is like, we haven't got any verses for that, let's just make it up from the Latin. So, but what it does show to us, so besides the lies that these guys are saying, shows to us that Erasmus was very careful about copying the manuscripts. So when he would go to libraries, obviously he's visiting this place, he's looking at the Reuchlin manuscript, and he is writing all this down, okay? And then if he visited libraries all over Europe and did this, so he's writing down variants, he's writing down things, and so he's copying this manuscript out. So doesn't that show you the level of scholarship that he had? That in all of his travels, you think, he's been doing Latin Bible, which he completed in, I think it was 1512. And so this is, a few years later, 4 years later. And then right up until, 1535, he's still doing this stuff all the way through. But you think, he's visiting a library and he's got the Book of Revelation in front of him. He wouldn't write that down, or, he's finding other manuscripts in Latin and all this. He's not writing it all down. And so this shows us that he was doing that, if you understand the true understanding what he was doing with the Reuchlin's Codex. I've got to stop saying papyri. And this shows us that these guys have basically formulated a myth about the TR that has this back translation in it, which is just a total myth. And so they're obviously using this myth to try to come against the TR, to try to demonize the TR, and to try to make people who support the TR and the King James Version, try to make us out look like we're a bunch of dimwits, we don't know what we're talking about, and we're just following Erasmus, And so this is why James White will jump on his program and say, you're a cultist, you're like a Mormon, you believe that, the Bible just floated down, Erasmus just writes a bunch of stuff and it becomes the text, and all this sort of stuff. And so it's not what happened, and I think I've clearly proven that, but I'm going to be writing a book on that, so keep me in prayer about that. And anyway, I'm going to go. So I've been chatting for nearly 4 hours. So that's a long time. But I'm glad that I'm finished. I'm glad that I covered all the topics that I did. Write in the comments if you want to say anything. Looks like a bunch of people are watching. It's hard to see who's watching because it says so many people are watching, but then it says one is watching with a little eyeball thing. But anyway, thanks guys. God bless you, and we will see you next time.